Ghost ships have haunted sailors' imaginations for centuries, and among them, one legend stands apart. Known as the ghost ship that reappears every century, this vessel is said to emerge from the mist without warning, drifting silently across the waves. Witnesses describe eerie lights, tattered sails, and the unsettling sense of a presence that defies explanation. From coastal towns to open seas, stories of its fleeting appearances have persisted for generations, leaving both fear and fascination in their wake. In this collection of real maritime mysteries, we explore ghost ships, abandoned vessels, and unexplained phenomena that continue to puzzle experts and sailors alike. Each tale reveals a glimpse into the unknown, challenging our understanding of the ocean and the secrets it keeps, as some ships never truly rest, drifting forever between reality and legend. The Flying Dutchman. Sailors crossing the world's oceans often told stories of strange lights, shifting seas, and omens that could not be explained, but none carried more weight than the tale of the Flying Dutchman. The name itself became a warning whispered on the decks of merchant ships and naval vessels alike, for those who claimed to see it described a ship unlike any other, a vessel doomed to sail forever and never reach a safe harbour. One of the earliest written accounts came from the late 17th century, when sailors along the trade routes around the Cape of Good Hope spoke of a phantom ship that appeared during violent storms. They described a vessel with full sails catching winds that seemed impossible, glowing faintly in the mist, and then vanishing as quickly as it appeared. These stories travelled across Europe, finding their way into letters, newspapers, and eventually maritime law that endured for centuries. Reports grew more specific in the 18th and 19th centuries, when naval officers began recording such encounters in official logs. In 1790, sailors claimed to have seen the ghostly Dutchman while rounding the southern tip of Africa, where storms and treacherous waves made the passage perilous. To these men, the sight of the ship was more than a curiosity. It was considered a bad omen, often followed by accidents or deaths among the crew. The most famous sighting was reported by Prince George of Wales, later King George V of the United Kingdom. On July 11, 1881, while serving on the HMS Inconstant near Australia, the prince wrote that he and 13 other sailors had seen a glowing ship pass close by before disappearing. The entry in his journal described the apparition as a strange red light that revealed a phantom ship, fully rigged before fading. Several men from his vessel recorded the same incident, which gave the story a weight that few other legends could match. What made the tale linger was not only who reported it, but the strange coincidences that followed. According to records, the sailor who first spotted the phantom ship from the mast later died in a fall, deepening the sense of doom that seemed tied to the vision. For those aboard, the event was not dismissed as a trick of the eye, but seen as something far more haunting, a reminder of the sea's power to hold mysteries that defied explanation. Many sailors believed the Flying Dutchman was a real ship, once captained by a Dutch trader who defied storms and swore he would sail until Judgment Day. Though the identity of this captain was never confirmed, stories suggested he was a man cursed for his arrogance. Some claimed he challenged God himself when he vowed to round the Cape of Good Hope even if it took him forever, and as punishment, he was condemned to sail endlessly with his ghostly crew. The legend spread across Europe, shaping plays, ballads, and even Richard Wagner's opera, which cemented the image of the doomed captain in popular culture. Skeptics, however, offered natural explanations. Some believed the sightings were caused by a phenomenon called Fata Morgana, a type of mirage that bends light and creates the illusion of distant ships floating above the water. In regions like the Cape of Good Hope, where sharp changes in temperature and sea air are common, such optical tricks can be especially vivid. Others suggested that exhausted sailors, struggling against storms and staring into lightning-lit skies, could have easily imagined shapes and sails that were not there. Yet even with these explanations, accounts continued. As late as the 20th century, ships reported seeing the Flying Dutchman in the waters near South Africa. Newspapers occasionally printed these sightings, describing vessels that appeared to shimmer in the fog before dissolving into nothing. The persistence of such reports, long after the age of sail had passed, kept the legend alive among modern seafarers. The psychological weight of the Flying Dutchman also played a role in why it endured. For sailors facing weeks or months at sea, surrounded by storms, uncertainty and death, the image of a cursed ship became a way to express their deepest fears. To believe that a ghost ship warned of disaster was to give shape to dangers they could not control. The story was told not simply to frighten, but to remind crews of the thin line between survival and loss on the ocean. Over time, the Dutchman entered the wider imagination, moving beyond sea tales into literature and theatre. Writers in the 19th century used it as a symbol of eternal punishment, and painters often depicted the ship caught in lightning storms, sails torn yet glowing with unearthly light. The image of a vessel fated never to find safe harbour resonated with audiences who saw in it a metaphor for human pride, despair, and the unknown forces that shape fate. Still, for those who claimed to have seen it with their own eyes, the Flying Dutchman was no symbol. To them, it was as real as the waves beneath their ship, a phantom that appeared suddenly and left behind silence, dread, and unanswered questions. That lingering uncertainty is what makes the tale endure. Centuries after the first sailors whispered of a ship that should not exist, the question remains whether they saw a trick of the sea or something that still sails in the shadows of the storm. Even now, as satellite navigation and steel hulls rule the oceans, the Flying Dutchman refuses to fade, a name that lingers in every sailor's mind as a warning that not everything on the water can be explained. The Mary Celeste. When sailors of the DEI Graciosa spotted another vessel drifting quietly in the Atlantic on December 4th, 1872, nothing about its appearance suggested disaster. The brigantine Mary Celeste rode high on the water with sails partly set. Its course steady, though without anyone visible on deck. It seemed less like a wreck and more like a ship whose crew had simply vanished into thin air. The captain of the DEI Graciosa, David Morehouse, ordered men to board the drifting vessel. When they climbed aboard, they found no sign of violence, no bodies, and no clear reason why the Mary Celeste was deserted. The cabin still held the captain's personal belongings, including his clothing, charts, and even a sword. In the galley, food supplies remained untouched, enough for 6 months at sea. Nothing suggested panic, yet the lifeboat was missing, and so was the crew of 10. The story of this mystery begins in New York, where the Mary Celeste had departed on November 7, 1872, carrying a cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol bound for Genoa, Italy. The ship was commanded by Captain Benjamin Briggs, a respected sailor who travelled with his wife Sarah and their young daughter Sophia. His crew included experienced seamen who had little reason to abandon a safe vessel. When the DEI Graciosa encountered the Mary Celeste a month later, the Atlantic was calm and no storms had been recorded strong enough to justify such a disappearance. One of the most unsettling details was the ship's logbook. The final entry was dated November 25th, 9 days before the ship was found, and it recorded nothing unusual. The entry placed the vessel near the Azores Islands, far from danger. If something had occurred in the days that followed, it left no trace in writing, only silence on the pages that should have carried more updates from Captain Briggs. Investigators who examined the Mary Celeste noticed that some of the hatches were open, and traces of water were found between the decks. Although the hull was intact, there were signs that about 3 feet of water had entered the ship, though not enough to threaten its safety. The barrels of alcohol were still secure, yet later inspection revealed that 9 were empty. Whether this leakage caused fumes strong enough to frighten the crew into abandoning ship remains one of the enduring questions. In January 1873, the vessel was brought into Gibraltar for an official inquiry. The hearing, led by Frederick Solly Flood, considered theories ranging from mutiny to piracy, though evidence for either was lacking. None of the crew's possessions were stolen, and the ship's cargo was largely untouched. Suspicion even briefly fell on Captain Morehouse of the DEI Graciosa, as some believed he might have staged the rescue for salvage money, but no proof supported the claim, and his reputation eventually cleared him. During the inquiry, inspectors also noted deep marks on the bow that suggested the vessel had faced rough seas, though not enough to account for abandonment. The ship's compass was found broken, and the sounding rod used to measure water in the hold was missing, which led some to believe Captain Briggs may have misjudged the ship's condition. These overlooked details hinted at confusion in the final moments, though they raised more questions than answers about why an experienced crew failed to return. The idea of an alcohol explosion gained traction when experts pointed out that fumes from the cargo could have built up below deck. If a spark threatened to ignite the vapours, the captain might have ordered an emergency evacuation into the lifeboat, intending to tow it until the danger passed. A sudden shift in weather or an accident could have separated the smaller craft from the larger vessel, leaving the crew helpless in the open sea. Yet no lifeboat was ever recovered, and the theory remains unproven. Over the years, wilder suggestions emerged, ranging from seaquakes to sea monsters, but none matched the available evidence. What troubled many was the eerie normalcy of the ship. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, and no damage suggesting an attack. The Mary Celeste looked almost ready to sail again, as if waiting for her captain to return to the helm. The fate of Captain Briggs, his family and his crew has never been solved. Newspapers of the time sensationalized the case, fueling public imagination with speculation and rumour. The mystery became so well known that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, long before creating Sherlock Holmes, published a fictionalized account of the ghost ship in 1884, further embedding the tale into popular culture. Though his version invented dramatic details, it ensured that the Mary Celeste's name would never be forgotten. Modern researchers still revisit the case, using nautical knowledge and weather data to test old theories. Some argue that a faulty chronometer may have convinced Briggs he was closer to land than he truly was, leading him to abandon ship prematurely. Others maintain that only a sudden life-threatening emergency could have driven such an experienced captain to leave a seaworthy vessel. Despite every attempt to explain it, the truth remains elusive, hidden in the empty waters where the crew vanished. The Mary Celeste continued to sail for years after the abandonment, passing through different owners and voyages, but her reputation carried a shadow that never faded. Sailors spoke of her as unlucky, and in 1885 she met an end when she ran aground in Haiti, condemned and left to decay. The wreck of the ship eventually disappeared, but the riddle of her missing crew endured. Somewhere between the Azores and the wide Atlantic horizon, the unanswered fate of the Mary Celeste still drifts, waiting for a truth no one has yet found. The Carroll A. Deering. At the edge of Diamond Shoals off Cape Hatteras, a stretch of water feared by sailors for centuries, a tall-masted schooner appeared in January 1921. Its sails flapped aimlessly in the wind, and its position suggested it had run hard aground. Locals who spotted the vessel from the shore noticed no one moving about the decks, only the eerie outline of a ship that seemed to be alive yet abandoned. The schooner was identified as the Carroll A. Deering, a 5-masted cargo ship built in Bath, Maine just 2 years earlier. She had left Norfolk, Virginia in late August 1920, carrying a load of coal destined for Rio de Janeiro. Commanding the voyage was Captain William H. Merritt, though he fell ill before departure and was replaced by Captain Willis T. Wormel, an experienced seaman from Maine. The crew consisted mainly of Scandinavian and Portuguese sailors recruited for the long journey south. After safely delivering her cargo in Brazil, the Deering began her return voyage to the United States in December. The last confirmed sighting came on January 28, 1921, when a lightship stationed near Cape Lookout, North Carolina, recorded that the schooner passed by and hailed them. According to the lightship keeper, the man who called out was not Captain Wormel, but another crew member, who reported the ship had lost its anchors. That detail unsettled investigators later, for it suggested unusual circumstances in the command structure. When rescuers reached the stranded vessel on February 4th, they found it in a state that deepened the mystery. The ship's wheel was shattered, the binnacle box containing the compass was smashed, and lifeboats were missing. Charts and navigational equipment had been taken as well, yet the galley still held food prepared for a meal, and the crew's personal belongings were left behind. The only living things discovered on board were several hungry cats. It was also noted by rescuers that both the ship's logbook and the vital navigational tools required for survival were missing. This deliberate removal suggested that whoever left the vessel had done so with the intention of continuing their journey elsewhere. Yet without records or maps, the lifeboat's destination remained unknown, and no trace of them was ever reported along the nearby coastline. The absence of violence was as baffling as the missing men. There were no signs of a struggle, no bloodstains, and no clear damage from a storm that might have swept the crew overboard. The condition of the Deering suggested an orderly abandonment, but why the crew would leave a ship so close to land remained unanswered. Some speculated that the sailors mutinied against Captain Wormel, who was known for his strict discipline, but no evidence of conflict surfaced. Government authorities opened an extensive investigation, unusual for a civilian vessel. The US Department of Commerce examined the case, gathering testimony from those who had last seen the schooner. Investigators even considered whether piracy was involved, since several other ships had vanished in the same period near the Atlantic coast. Prohibition had recently begun in the United States, raising suspicions that rum runners or organised gangs may have seized the ship, though no stolen cargo was ever traced. Testimony from other ships raised further questions. A steamer named Hewitt vanished in the same waters within days of the Deering's grounding, carrying all hands with it. Some investigators linked the two incidents, proposing a shared cause such as piracy or foul weather. The proximity in time and place fueled speculation that something larger was unfolding along the busy shipping lanes of the East Coast, but no hard evidence ever tied the two disappearances together. Others proposed that the Deering had fallen victim to the notorious conditions of the graveyard of the Atlantic, where shifting sandbars and sudden storms caused countless wrecks. Diamond Shoals in particular had claimed many ships, though the neat disappearance of an entire crew without wreckage or bodies was unprecedented. Some naval experts suggested that a hurricane could have forced the sailors to abandon ship, but weather reports from the time did not indicate storms of such magnitude. In the years that followed, theories multiplied. Some blamed Bolshevik sympathizers, pointing to scattered reports of radical activity among sailors after the First World War. Others tied the case to the Bermuda Triangle, though the Deering had not sailed within its borders. The lack of a lifeboat recovery prevented any closure, leaving the fate of Captain Wormel and his men open to speculation. The Department of State even received reports from American consuls abroad, suggesting that radical groups might be targeting US ships. One letter from Havana warned of plots to seize vessels and use them to disrupt Atlantic trade. Though these claims were never substantiated, they reveal how seriously the government treated the Deering case, turning it into one of the most investigated maritime mysteries of its era. The Deering story attracted wide public attention partly because it arrived during a decade when ghost ship tales filled newspapers. The unexplained abandonment became part of a larger narrative of vanishing vessels, fueling fears about hidden dangers along the American coast. To this day, no documentation has surfaced that proves what truly happened in those last days before the schooner ran aground. For historians, the Carroll A. Deering remains a rare blend of solid evidence and a complete absence of answers. The wreck stood as a visible reminder for months before being demolished by storms, yet the men who had walked her deck seemed to have disappeared into the ocean without leaving a trace. What became of the Carroll A. Deering's crew is still hidden in the restless waters off Cape Hatteras, as if the sea itself has locked away their fate. The Kaz II mystery. The yacht Kaz II looked like any other small pleasure craft drifting on the waters of northern Australia. White sails caught the sunlight, the hull moved gently with the current, and from a distance nothing seemed unusual. Yet as a Coastwatch plane flew overhead in April 2007, the vessel appeared oddly deserted. The men who had set out on it days earlier were nowhere to be seen, though the boat itself floated steadily as if waiting for someone to come back on board. The Kaz II was a 12-metre catamaran owned by Queensland resident Derek Batten. Alongside him were brothers Peter and James Tunstead, all three in their 50s. They were not reckless adventurers, but middle-aged men on what was meant to be a relaxing trip along the northeastern coastline. On April 15th, 2007, the yacht departed from Airlie Beach in the Whitsunday Islands, its destination being Townsville, a straightforward journey expected to last only a few days. When authorities first boarded the drifting vessel on April 20th, they discovered a scene that seemed frozen in time. A laptop computer was still turned on, personal belongings were untouched, and the table inside the cabin was set for a meal. A newspaper dated April 15th lay open, further confirming that the men had left in an orderly manner. There was no sign of a struggle, no bloodstains, and no evidence that the boat had encountered violent weather. The yacht's sails were damaged, yet its engine was still running and fuel had not been depleted. Investigators noted that one sail was badly shredded and another was hanging loose, suggesting that a sudden change in wind might have caught the crew off guard. However, there were no signs of panic inside the boat. Life jackets remained neatly stored, the first aid kit was untouched, and the emergency radio beacon had not been activated. To experienced sailors, this absence of distress signals was puzzling. It was as though the crew had simply vanished mid-routine without any attempt to call for help. The search for the 3 men expanded across hundreds of kilometres of open sea. Helicopters, surveillance aircraft, and rescue vessels combed the waters around the Whitsundays and toward Townsville. Despite this intensive effort, not a single body or trace of the crew was ever found. Friends and family members clung to the hope that the men might have been rescued by another boat or had swum to a nearby island, but days of silence quickly crushed these possibilities. The official inquest considered a number of scenarios. One theory suggested that one of the men may have fallen overboard while adjusting the sails. If another tried to rescue him and the third attempted to help as well, all 3 could have ended up in the water, leaving the yacht to drift unmanned. Supporters of this explanation pointed to the tangled rigging and torn sail as possible evidence of a sudden accident. Yet critics questioned why none of them grabbed a life jacket or raised an alarm. Another possibility raised was that the men had anchored to fish or swim, and that strong currents carried them away before they could return to the yacht. The waters around the Whitsundays are known for tricky tidal patterns and hidden rips that can drag even strong swimmers far from shore. However, skeptics argued that 3 men simultaneously being swept away without leaving behind any clues seemed too improbable. Speculation also spread outside the courtroom and into the public imagination. Some suggested piracy or foul play, though investigators found no sign of theft or intrusion on the boat. Others raised the idea of an encounter with a rogue wave or sudden squall, but weather reports from those days indicated mild conditions. Still, the unexplained tearing of the sail left many uneasy, as though the sea itself had delivered a warning before erasing the men from its surface. The yacht's condition revealed small but haunting details. A pair of sunglasses rested on the navigation table, left as if the owner expected to return within minutes. Clothing was still hanging in the cabins, dry and folded. Even fishing lines trailed behind the vessel, suggesting that the men had been engaged in calm everyday activities shortly before vanishing. Every object seemed to insist that its departure was not planned but abrupt, as if interrupted mid-action. Inquiries into the men's backgrounds yielded no evidence of hidden motives. They were described as family men, close friends, and ordinary Australians who had saved for years to enjoy their leisure time on the water. Financial records showed no debts or troubles, and none of them had medical conditions likely to cause sudden collapse. This absence of personal turmoil only deepened the mystery, removing the possibility of voluntary disappearance. The eerie calm surrounding the vessel echoed another case that had unsettled maritime history more than a century earlier, the disappearance of the crew of the Mary Celeste. Journalists seized on the parallel, dubbing the CAS-2 the modern ghost ship. Yet while the earlier mystery spanned the Atlantic Ocean, this one unfolded within sight of the Australian mainland, under relatively controlled conditions. That proximity made it harder to accept that 3 men could simply vanish without a trace. The inquest eventually concluded that the likeliest explanation was accidental drowning brought about by an unforeseen mishap while handling the sails. Still, the coroner acknowledged the lack of hard evidence and the unusual tidiness of the vessel. For families, this official statement offered little comfort, as no remains were ever recovered and no definitive sequence of events was established. Over the years, the case has remained in public memory, often resurfacing in discussions of unexplained maritime events. Sailors passing through the Whitsundays sometimes remark that the story lingers in the region like an unspoken warning. The CAS-2 itself was eventually returned to its owner, yet the absence of its crew has permanently marked it as more than just a yacht. Questions continue to circle the smallest details. Why did no one send a radio call when trouble began? How could 3 capable men vanish so completely in waters not far from shore? And why did the yacht remain in such neat order if a frantic accident had occurred? These unanswered points keep the case suspended between the ordinary and the uncanny. The CAS-2 sailed out as a symbol of leisure and friendship, but returned as an empty vessel drifting silently on a calm sea, leaving behind one of Australia's most unsettling maritime puzzles. The Joyita. Drifting near Fiji in November 1955, the MV Joyita was found by rescuers in circumstances that seemed impossible to understand. The small cargo vessel listed heavily to one side, its hull scarred and weather-beaten, but still afloat. From a distance, it looked like a ship that had survived a violent storm. Yet on board, investigators found a different kind of chaos, one that raised more questions than it answered. The Joyita had left Samoa on October 3rd, 1955, bound for the Tokelau Islands, carrying 25 passengers and crew. Its manifest listed medical supplies, timber, food and oil drums among its cargo. The voyage was routine, expected to last only 2 days across well-travelled waters. Captain Thomas Miller, a seasoned American mariner who had relocated to the South Pacific, was in command. He was known for his confidence, sometimes to the point of dismissing warnings about the vessel's maintenance problems. By the time the Joyita was discovered nearly a month later, it was drifting more than 600 miles from its intended route. There was no trace of any of the people who had sailed from Samoa. Lifeboats were missing, suggesting an evacuation, but the vessel itself was still seaworthy, which made the absence of passengers all the more unsettling. The ship's radio equipment was damaged, with wires pulled free and the microphone gone. This strange tampering implied deliberate human action rather than storm damage. The deeper investigators looked, the more contradictions they found. The vessel's clocks had all stopped at 10:25, as though time itself had frozen at a particular moment. The ship's logbook was missing, erasing any official record of what had occurred during the voyage. Food supplies remained on board, along with cargo items, undermining the idea of a panicked evacuation. Even more disturbing, a doctor's bag lay abandoned with surgical instruments scattered around it, hinting that someone had been injured shortly before the abandonment. The hull revealed another clue. Patches of damage suggested the Joyita had taken on water, but not enough to sink her. In fact, the ship was designed with a cork-lined hull that gave it significant buoyancy. This meant that the vessel was virtually unsinkable, even when flooded. Experts later confirmed that she could not have sunk completely, which made her abandonment all the more baffling. Why would experienced seafarers leave a floating vessel for lifeboats that offered far less safety in the open Pacific? Attention soon shifted to the reliability of the captain himself. Miller was a man with decades of sea experience, but had a reputation for cutting corners. Prior to departure, concerns were raised about the ship's engine problems and faulty radio. Some argued that the crew might have lost faith in Miller's leadership if he dismissed their concerns during a crisis. Others countered that his determination to maintain control would have made him unlikely to order an unnecessary evacuation. This tension between confidence and recklessness became central to the mystery. As speculation grew, rumours spread across the Pacific. Some claimed the Joyita had been attacked by pirates, pointing to the missing firearms that were normally kept on board. Others suggested the vessel may have stumbled into Cold War intrigue, with whispers of Soviet submarines or covert operations in the Pacific at that time. These theories found fertile ground because of the ship's unexplained route deviation and the deliberate-looking sabotage to its radio. Yet there was no direct evidence for hostile involvement. Family members of the passengers raised haunting questions. If the crew had launched lifeboats, why were no remains, debris or sightings ever reported across such a wide stretch of ocean? Search operations combed thousands of square miles of water, but nothing was recovered. Survivors from other maritime disasters often washed ashore in the Pacific after days or weeks, yet in the case of the Joyita, it was as though all 25 people had been erased. The cargo itself added another strange element. Much of the listed goods were missing, including barrels of oil and medical supplies, though there were no signs of plunder. Some suggested the cargo had floated away when the vessel listed and its holds flooded, while others argued the items may have been deliberately offloaded into the sea during a desperate attempt to lighten the ship. This absence fueled darker ideas that the disappearance might have involved smuggling or an attempted insurance scheme gone wrong. Years later, maritime experts revisited the case and pointed out a crucial factor. The Joyita's bilge pumps were clogged and non-functional. This meant water flooding into the vessel would have risen unchecked inside the hull. To those unfamiliar with the ship's buoyant design, it may have appeared that the vessel was close to sinking. In that moment, passengers and crew could have believed abandoning ship was their only chance at survival. The problem with this explanation is that the captain, at least, would have known the ship could not sink, raising doubts that all would willingly leave. The name Joyita, meaning little jewel in Spanish, was ironic considering the vessel's troubled history. Built in California in 1931, it had survived multiple mishaps before its fateful final voyage. At one point, the ship had caught fire and been partially destroyed. On another occasion, it had collided with a dock. By 1955, the vessel was aging and plagued with mechanical faults, making it both resilient and unreliable. This mixed legacy may have shaped how crew and passengers responded when trouble struck. What makes the Joyita so enduring as a mystery is the lack of closure. Unlike many lost vessels, the ship itself was recovered, but without its people. The presence of abandoned personal belongings, unfinished repairs, and broken radio wires gave investigators fragments of a story but never the full picture. Each clue contradicts the others, creating a riddle that continues to frustrate maritime historians. The Pacific Ocean is vast enough to swallow evidence, yet the Joyita feels different because it returned. An empty shell of a ship floated back into the world, stripped of its human presence but still carrying the marks of its last hours. It is this eerie combination, recovered vessel, missing souls, that keeps the case alive in memory. The MV Joyita drifts in history as a vessel that came back without its people, a reminder that the ocean can return the body of a ship while keeping the fate of its crew forever concealed. The Ourang Medan. Sailors in the Straits of Malacca have long traded stories of strange lights, sudden storms, and vessels that appear where none should be. Among these tales, one name recurs with chilling frequency: the SS Ourang Medan, a Dutch freighter said to have been found adrift in the late 1940s, with its entire crew mysteriously dead. The ship's appearance was brief, its presence fleeting, but the legacy of what was discovered has unsettled maritime historians for decades. The earliest reports suggest that distress calls from the Ourang Medan were picked up by American and British vessels navigating the busy waters between Sumatra and Malaysia. The fragmented message was said to include the haunting words, "All officers including the captain are dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead." The final transmission ended with two words, "I die." Then there was silence. When the nearest responding ship, often identified as the Silver Star, reached the drifting freighter, they found it eerily still. No signs of activity came from the deck. No crew appeared to acknowledge their arrival. Boarding parties climbed aboard cautiously, prepared for disease or violence. What they found instead was worse than either possibility. The crew lay sprawled across the ship in grotesque positions. Some had their arms raised as if shielding themselves from something unseen, while others wore expressions of horror frozen on their faces. There were no wounds, no blood, and no signs of a struggle. Even the ship's dog, usually a loyal companion on long voyages, was discovered dead with teeth bared in terror. The engine room told a similar story. Engineers were collapsed beside their machinery, eyes wide open, mouths contorted in grimaces. Yet the equipment itself was intact, showing no signs of an explosion or fire. The ship seemed whole, but its people were lifeless. To those who first stepped onto the Ourang Medan, it must have felt like walking through a floating tomb where death had struck invisibly. Speculation about what caused such a scene began almost immediately. Poisonous gases leaking from the cargo holds were one possibility. The Straits of Malacca were a hub for trade in hazardous materials, and some researchers later suggested that illegal shipments of chemicals such as potassium cyanide or nitroglycerin might have been hidden on board. If those substances leaked, the crew could have inhaled toxic fumes without warning, dying in positions that reflected their last moments of panic. But if toxic gas had been the culprit, investigators wondered why the boarding party suffered no ill effects. They remained on the ship long enough to observe and attempt to tow. The absence of harm to rescuers left this explanation incomplete, fueling the idea that something else, perhaps more fleeting, had killed the crew before dispersing into the air. Another theory pointed to carbon monoxide poisoning from a malfunctioning boiler. A leak in the engine system could have filled the ship with fumes, silently killing those below decks before rising to the bridge and cabins. This scenario would account for the intact state of the vessel and the lack of visible injuries. Still, it could not fully explain the expressions of terror noted on the corpses, nor why the ship's radio operator managed to send such a dramatic series of distress calls before succumbing. The most unsettling detail came after the discovery. Reports state that when efforts began to tow the vessel to port, smoke started rising from the lower decks. Flames spread quickly, forcing rescuers to cut their lines and abandon the ghost ship. Moments later, the Ourang Medan exploded with such force that it sank into the sea, taking with it any chance of a thorough investigation. With the wreck gone, All that remained were witness accounts and fragments of radio transmissions. Doubts about the story's authenticity grew in later decades. Researchers trying to trace official records found no registration for a ship named Ourang Medan. Dutch archives did not list it, nor did British or American shipping registers. Some historians concluded that the vessel never existed, dismissing the tale as maritime folklore born of Cold War paranoia and seafarer storytelling. Yet the consistency of the distress call in multiple retellings makes others reluctant to discard it entirely. A few investigators have proposed that the name itself might have been altered. Ourang Medan translates loosely as man from Medan, linking it to the Indonesian port city of Medan on Sumatra. Some argue that the name was a disguise for another vessel transporting forbidden cargo through international waters. If so, governments and shipping companies might have had an incentive to bury the incident, erasing records that could expose illegal activity. The lack of documentation has not silenced the mystery. Newspaper articles from the 1940s and 1950s reference the story, though details vary. In some versions, the rescuing ship was Italian rather than American. In others, the explosion occurred while the boarding party was still aboard, with men barely escaping with their lives. These contradictions complicate the narrative, but they also echo the way oral history evolves, carrying fragments of truth through layers of rumour. Among sailors, the story gained a supernatural edge. Some whispered that the crew had been struck down by forces beyond human understanding, pointing to the terrified looks on their faces. Others suggested an encounter with unknown sea creatures or paranormal phenomena. While such explanations fall outside science, they reflect the deep unease the incident left in those who believed it happened. The Ourang Medan occupies a unique place among maritime mysteries because it sits at the border between recorded history and myth. On the other hand, the absence of formal proof weakens the case, yet the vividness of the descriptions, the frozen faces, the final radio call, the explosion, makes it impossible to dismiss entirely. Each retelling carries the same chilling sense of a ship that briefly emerged from the sea's silence only to vanish forever. If the story is true, the Ourang Medan may still rest somewhere on the seabed of the Straits of Malacca, its secrets sealed within twisted metal and buried cargo. If it is not, the persistence of the tale shows how powerfully the ocean can hold our imagination, turning rumour into legend. Either way, the image of a doomed crew sending their last desperate words into the night refuses to fade. The Ourang Medan lingers as a phantom of the sea, its unanswered distress call echoing across time like a voice that was never meant to be silenced. The Octavius. In the late 18th century, the seas around Greenland and the North Atlantic carried a reputation for both promise and peril. Traders and whalers moved through icy waters in search of wealth, but stories often circulated of ships that never returned. Among these tales, none is more chilling than that of the Octavius, a vessel said to have been discovered drifting silently, its crew frozen in place, caught in a moment of death that looked almost like life. The first recorded mention of the Octavius comes from accounts tied to 1775, when a whaling ship called the Herald reportedly spotted a derelict vessel west of Greenland. Sailors who boarded the drifting craft found the decks eerily quiet. No voices rose above the creak of timber, and the wind seemed to press against the sails of a ship that should have been empty. Yet inside, what they discovered left them shaken for years. The boarding party stepped into the captain's cabin and froze at the sight before them. At a desk sat a man with a pen in hand as though mid-sentence. His body was stiff, locked in posture, and his face had the pallor of ice. Around him, the rest of the crew appeared in similar states, found in their bunks or at their posts, preserved in death by the Arctic cold. The impression was not of chaos or violence, but of lives interrupted all at once without warning. The captain's logbook reportedly provided a hint of what might have happened. Entries suggested that the ship had departed England for China in 1761 and made its way successfully to the Pacific. On the return voyage, it may have attempted the fabled Northwest Passage, a route through the Arctic that explorers of the time desperately sought but rarely survived. The last legible note in the log was dated 1762, more than a decade before the ship's discovery. If true, the Octavius had been adrift for 13 years. The Northwest Passage itself was a graveyard of ambition in the 18th century. Expeditions led by skilled navigators often ended in disaster when ships became locked in ice and supplies ran out. The environment was merciless, with shifting flows and temperatures that could drop suddenly, trapping entire crews. If the Octavius had ventured into this route unprepared, the outcome would have been almost inevitable. Yet what stood out in the reports was the condition of the bodies, which seemed too perfectly preserved, as though time itself had frozen along with them. The Herald's crew, unsettled by the scene, did not linger long. They are said to have taken only the logbook before leaving the vessel to drift back into the ice. Practical concerns likely weighed on their decision. With the danger of freezing temperatures and the threat of storms, remaining aboard a ghost ship offered no reward worth the risk. The Octavius was left to vanish once more into the Arctic waters, and no further sighting of the ship has ever been verified. Skeptics question the details of this account, noting that the story of the Octavius first appears in print decades after the supposed event. Some argue it may have been a sailor's yarn, embellished over time until it took on the weight of legend. Others point out that frozen crews were not unheard of in polar exploration, lending a degree of plausibility to the tale. The blend of possibility and uncertainty is perhaps what keeps the Octavius lodged in maritime lore. What makes the story especially haunting is the image of the captain at his desk. Unlike chaotic shipwrecks or tales of mutiny, this scene suggested no struggle, no signs of desperation in the final moments. It was as if the crew had been seized by an invisible hand, their fates sealed in a single silent hour. Sailors who heard the story afterward described it as more terrifying than battle, because it showed how the sea could claim lives without warning or resistance. The idea that the Octavius attempted the Northwest Passage adds another layer of intrigue. In the 18th century, the successful navigation of this route would have been groundbreaking, promising shorter trade links between Europe and Asia. If the logbook dates are genuine, the Octavius may have completed the passage, making it the first known vessel to do so, though at a terrible cost. Historians debate whether the ship could truly have drifted from the Pacific through the Arctic into the Atlantic, but the possibility underscores how little was understood about the region at the time. Reports of ghost ships were not rare in seafaring circles, but the Octavius stands apart because of the vividness of its frozen tableau. Unlike other tales that faded into exaggeration, this story carried specific details: a named ship, a timeline, and the suggestion of a tangible logbook. These elements gave it an edge of credibility, enough that the legend persisted in maritime literature for centuries. Writers in the 19th century picked up the account, often repeating it in collections of sea mysteries. Each retelling added to its aura, portraying the Octavius as a warning against hubris, a reminder of how ambition to conquer unknown waters could lead to doom. The icy stillness of the crew became a symbol of the ocean's ability to suspend human endeavour in silence, erasing even the sound of final words. To this day, no one has ever recovered evidence of the Octavius beyond the original story. No wreck has been identified, and the supposed logbook has not surfaced in any archive. Without physical proof, the Octavius remains a shadow, balanced between history and folklore. Yet it continues to be retold because it touches on a primal fear, that of being trapped in an endless void of ice, one's last breath lingering forever in frozen air. The enduring power of the tale lies not in whether it can be proven, but in the images it evokes. A ship drifting under pale northern skies, its sails stiff with frost, carrying a silent crew whose voyage ended years before. The Octavius, whether real or imagined, embodies the thin line between exploration and oblivion, and the unsettling thought that some journeys never truly end. The sight of that vessel frozen in the ice still endures in memory, a chilling reminder that some ships guard secrets that never sleep. The HMS Resolute. Winter in the Arctic leaves the sea sealed under ice so thick that even the strongest ships can be held in place like insects trapped in amber. In those frozen stretches, vessels either outlast the cold or are abandoned to silence. Among the many ships that faced this fate, the HMS Resolute earned a story unlike any other, because her disappearance into the ice was only the beginning of a journey that would later turn her into a symbol of both mystery and unity. The ship was launched in 1850 as part of Britain's desperate search for Sir John Franklin's lost expedition. Dozens of crews had vanished while trying to chart the Northwest Passage, and the Admiralty poured resources into recovery attempts. Resolute, a sturdy wooden ship reinforced for polar service, was commanded by Captain Horatio Thomas Austin during her first voyage, and she soon became a key part of Britain's Arctic efforts. The mission was dangerous, but the Royal Navy was determined to find answers about Franklin and his men. During the 1850 expedition, Resolute joined several ships in Baffin Bay and Lancaster Sound, combing the icy passages for traces of Franklin. Conditions were brutal, with crews forced to survive months of darkness, dwindling rations and frostbite. Despite intense searching, no final proof of Franklin's fate was uncovered, though cairns and artifacts suggested the missing expedition had tried to march south after being locked in ice. These small clues only deepened the urgency of the mission, and Resolute was ordered back for further service. In 1852, the ship was refitted and placed under the command of Captain Henry Kellett as part of Sir Edward Belcher's larger expedition. This fleet was tasked not only with continuing the Franklin search, but also with mapping uncharted waters. Resolute proved her resilience during this voyage, enduring long winters in the Arctic, where temperatures could plunge so low that wood cracked like glass and iron bolts groaned in the cold. The crew performed daily routines to ward off despair, including plays, lectures, and even musical performances, all under flickering lamps that barely pierced the surrounding gloom. But the Arctic is merciless, and in 1854 the ice closed in around Resolute with no sign of release. After months of being trapped and supplies running dangerously low, Belcher gave the order that stunned his men. All the ships under his command that were icebound were to be abandoned. Despite protests, Resolute's crew followed orders, leaving behind a vessel that was still intact, locked in a white prison of ice. The men trekked across frozen wastes to reach relief ships, enduring hunger and exhaustion but eventually making their way home. Most abandoned ships were crushed or lost without a trace, but Resolute's story took an extraordinary turn. In September 1855, more than a year after she had been left behind, the American whaler George Henry spotted a strange sight in Davis Strait. There, drifting slowly with her sails still rigged, was a fully armed Royal Navy ship. Captain James Buddington and his crew boarded and realised they had discovered HMS Resolute, preserved and seaworthy despite her ordeal. It was as though the ice had chosen not to claim her. Buddington's men navigated the ship more than 1,200 miles south, eventually reaching New London, Connecticut. The discovery stirred fascination across the United States. Here was a British warship, abandoned in the Arctic and then guided by chance into American hands. The US government faced a decision: keep the ship or return it as a gesture of goodwill to a nation with whom relations were often tense. President Franklin Pierce and Congress chose the latter. After repairs were made at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the ship was sailed back to Britain in 1856, presented to Queen Victoria as a gift. The gesture was received with gratitude, and Resolute was celebrated not only as a survivor of the ice, but as a symbol of friendship between the two nations. For a time, she continued to serve in the Royal Navy, though she never returned to polar waters. By 1879, age had caught up with the ship, and Resolute was retired and broken up for timber, yet her story did not end with dismantling. Queen Victoria ordered that several desks be crafted from the ship's oak. The largest, known as the Resolute desk, was presented to President Rutherford B. Hayes in 1880. Today it sits in the Oval Office of the White House, used by nearly every US president since. The desk's presence carries with it the memory of a ship that once drifted alone through the Arctic, abandoned yet unbroken. What remains most unsettling about the tale is how the vessel managed to survive adrift in ice for more than a year. Most ships trapped under such conditions never escaped, crushed by shifting floes or splintered until they sank beneath the frozen sea. The Resolute appeared almost protected, released at the right moment to drift south into the path of discovery. For sailors of the time, the ship seemed touched by fate, as if the Arctic had chosen to spare it when so many others had been claimed. Maritime historians continue to debate the circumstances of the ship's survival. Some suggest unusual weather patterns freed the vessel, allowing it to ride currents southward without serious damage. Others wonder whether luck alone can explain how an abandoned ship remained intact and seaworthy through 2 polar winters. Whatever the answer, the event left a mark on seafaring history, blending fact with an air of the uncanny. When people look at the Resolute desk today, few consider that it was built from wood that once faced the crushing ice of the Arctic. Behind the polished surface lies a story of abandonment, rediscovery, and improbable survival. The desk is admired as a symbol of diplomacy, yet it also carries the silence of the frozen north. where a ship once drifted with no crew to guide her. In the shadow of Franklin's unsolved fate, the journey of the Resolute emerged as a mystery of its own, a vessel brought back from the dead to leave a legacy both political and spectral. The ship's timbers, reshaped into objects of state, serve as a reminder that the Arctic can bury lives yet release stories that linger far beyond the ice. And so the memory of HMS Resolute endures, a ship abandoned to desolation that somehow found its way back into history, leaving behind questions that no sea or desk can fully answer. The Jenny. Stories of ghost ships often blur the line between fact and legend, but few tales have captured imaginations like that of the schooner known as the Jenny. It is remembered not for a battle at sea or a wreck along a coast, but for drifting silently in the most hostile waters of the world, carrying a crew long frozen in time. What makes the account unsettling is not only the desolation of the discovery, but also how little could be confirmed, leaving questions to echo through maritime history. According to reports, the Jenny was an English schooner that became locked in Antarctic ice sometime in the early 19th century. Details of her origin remain hazy, and records of her departure are scarce, which already gives the ship an air of uncertainty. Unlike well-documented naval vessels, she seems to vanish from paper trails just as completely as she would vanish into the southern ice. That absence of clear documentation has kept researchers struggling to piece together what truly happened. The story surfaced in the 19th century through publications that claimed the ship had been discovered by another vessel in 1840. According to these accounts, a whaler named Hope came across the Jenny frozen in the Drake Passage, that treacherous stretch of water between South America and Antarctica. The crew of the Hope supposedly boarded the schooner and found a sight that chilled them to the core. Inside the icebound vessel, the entire crew of the Jenny was said to be dead, preserved by the cold as if life had simply paused and never resumed. Descriptions tell of men frozen at their posts, with the captain seated at his desk, logbook still before him. In that log, the last entry was reportedly dated 1823, nearly 17 years before the ship was said to have been found. If the account is accurate, the Jenny had drifted locked in ice for nearly 2 decades, carrying a silent company of the dead across Antarctic seas before it was stumbled upon by chance. The stillness of such a discovery would have been unlike anything else sailors could imagine. For many, it is the detail of the logbook that makes the story so haunting. The idea of a final entry written by a captain who knew the fate of his ship adds a human voice to an otherwise silent tragedy. The precise wording of that entry has been repeated in different forms across newspapers and retellings, though consistency is rare. This variation in phrasing raises doubts about whether the document ever existed, or whether later writers shaped the account to make it more dramatic. Skeptics point out that the first published reference to the Jenny came not in official maritime records, but in a German magazine decades after the supposed discovery. The lack of corroborating British naval or commercial sources makes it difficult to confirm the schooner's fate. Maritime historians often stress that no vessel named Jenny with matching details appears in Lloyd's Register, the shipping list that recorded most active ships of the period. This absence suggests that either the story was exaggerated, or that the ship sailed under a different name and slipped through official record-keeping. Despite these gaps, the tale persisted and spread rapidly. Newspapers in the mid to late 19th century printed versions of the account, sometimes embellishing the number of crew members or altering the exact location where the ship was found. Each retelling added layers of myth, which only deepened the mystery. Was the Jenny truly discovered? Or was she a cautionary tale meant to remind sailors of the dangers of venturing too far into Antarctic waters? Even with doubts, the story struck a chord because it reflected real fears of the time. The early 19th century saw a surge of ships exploring the southern oceans, chasing whaling grounds and new trade routes. These voyages were dangerous, and ships often vanished without explanation. Families back home received no word, only silence that could last forever. The Jenny's supposed discovery gave form to those anxieties. A ship lost to ice, her crew never to return, their fate preserved but unreadable. In Antarctic conditions, such a scenario is not impossible. Modern science has shown that extreme cold can preserve bodies for centuries. Expeditions in the 20th century uncovered remarkably intact remains of explorers who perished in the frozen south. The idea that a ship might be locked in ice for decades is also plausible, since Ice floes move slowly and can release objects after long periods. This scientific possibility keeps the story alive, even when documentation is lacking. There is also a symbolic quality to the Jenny's tale that ensures its survival in maritime lore. The schooner represents the fragility of human ambition against the vastness of nature. A crew sets out with hope, only to be silenced by forces beyond their control. Yet, instead of vanishing without a trace, they return as a frozen tableau, a reminder that the sea does not always erase, but sometimes preserves its secrets with unnerving clarity. Writers and storytellers seized upon the Jenny as inspiration, weaving her into collections of maritime mysteries. The story appeared alongside other legends of ghost ships, such as the Flying Dutchman, though the Jenny was unique in being tied to Antarctic exploration, rather than to storms or supernatural punishment. That distinction gave her a grim realism that appealed to readers of the 19th century, who followed news of polar expeditions with both awe and dread. Attempts to trace the origins of the account often circle back to one publication, the German magazine Globus in 1862. From there, the story entered English-language newspapers, eventually spreading into popular culture. The lack of earlier references is striking and remains one of the main reasons scholars suspect fabrication. If such a dramatic discovery had been made in 1840, why did it take more than 20 years for it to appear in print? The delay undermines its credibility but also feeds the sense of mystery. Some researchers suggest that the Jenny story may have been inspired by real events, then altered over time. Ships did vanish in Antarctic waters in the early 1800s, and whalers often returned with strange stories of what they encountered. It is possible that fragments of truth, an abandoned vessel, bodies preserved in cold, were reshaped into a more haunting narrative. As with many sea tales, the blending of fact and fiction is almost impossible to separate once decades have passed. What remains undeniable is the hold the Jenny has maintained on the imagination. Whether she ever truly existed or not, her image drifts through history. A schooner carried by ice, her crew frozen in place, a captain's final words left to be read by strangers nearly 2 decades too late. The absence of proof has not erased her from maritime lore, but instead secured her place as one of the ocean's enduring phantoms. Sailors once whispered of her as a warning about the unforgiving South, while readers cherish the tale as a story of mystery and dread. The Jenny continues to be invoked in books and articles, often with the same stark image of her lifeless crew awaiting discovery. What began as a questionable report has become a legend that no amount of scrutiny seems able to erase. While the truth of the Jenny may remain forever uncertain, her memory endures as that of a ship trapped between history and myth, waiting in the frozen seas of Antarctica. The Zebrina. The English Channel in 1917 was no ordinary stretch of sea. War had turned its busy waters into a dangerous corridor where every crossing carried risk. Merchant ships moved coal, food and munitions to support the Allied effort, yet lurking beneath the waves were German submarines, silent hunters waiting to strike. Sailors spoke of the Channel with a mix of respect and fear, aware that even a short voyage could end without warning. Among the vessels working those waters was the Zebrina, a schooner barge built in 1873. At 189 tons, she was not a warship but a simple cargo carrier, sturdy enough for coastal runs. Originally designed to haul coal between English ports, she had been repurposed during the war to supply France, an ally whose industries and armies depended on steady shipments of fuel. Though modest in size, her role in the supply chain was vital. On the morning of September 15, 1917, Zebrina left Falmouth in Cornwall, loaded with coal bound for Saint-Brieuc on the French coast. Her journey was meant to be routine, a short passage across the Channel that countless vessels attempted every week. She carried a small crew, men accustomed to the hazards of wartime shipping, but likely confident that their mission was straightforward. Nothing about the departure suggested what was about to unfold. 2 days later, on September 17th, the Zebrina was discovered grounded near Roselle Point in France. The sight of the vessel should have been reassuring to those who spotted her, but instead it deepened the unease. She stood upright, sails still set as though her crew had only just stepped away. The cargo remained untouched, and the ship showed no signs of battle damage. Yet not a single sailor could be found on board. The condition of the schooner raised immediate questions. Cabins still held the crew's belongings, suggesting no hurried evacuation. The decks bore no evidence of a fight or accident, and the ship's structure was intact. No storm had swept through this channel during her passage that might explain an emergency. It was as though the men had simply vanished into the air, leaving their vessel to drift aimlessly until it ran aground. The disappearance unfolded during the height of World War I, when the Channel was one of the most contested seas in the world. German U-boats patrolled aggressively, sinking hundreds of merchant vessels in an attempt to choke Allied supply lines. The menace of submarine attack hung over every voyage, and the British Admiralty recorded losses daily. In such an environment, Zebrina's intact survival seemed even more puzzling. One theory emerged quickly, that a U-boat had intercepted the schooner, removed the crew as prisoners, and left the ship to drift. This idea matched known German tactics, as submarines sometimes surfaced to capture sailors before sinking their vessels. Yet in most recorded cases, the ships themselves were destroyed after the crews were taken. Why would the Zebrina have been spared, left perfectly intact with its cargo still in place? Others argued that the crew may have abandoned ship in panic, perhaps mistaking a distant sighting of a periscope or torpedo wake for an imminent attack. If they took to lifeboats, they might have been lost in the channel's strong currents before reaching land. But this explanation fails to account for the absence of distress signals or any reported wreckage of small boats. Abandoning a seaworthy vessel in calm conditions would also have defied maritime practice. Maritime investigators and sailors soon pointed to the larger pattern of ghost ships reported during the war. Zebrina was not alone. Other vessels, such as schooners and fishing boats, were occasionally found adrift or aground without their crews. The stress of wartime conditions may have contributed to confusion, but the sheer number of unexplained abandonments suggested that something more complex was taking place. The lack of physical evidence only deepened the mystery. No bloodstains, no bullet holes, no broken rigging, nothing indicated violence or sabotage. If a U-boat had intervened, why was there no record of prisoners taken? If the crew had escaped, why was every personal belonging still on board? Each possibility seemed to collapse under closer scrutiny, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. Researchers have speculated that wartime secrecy may hold the key. The British Admiralty and German Naval Command both kept strict control over records, and many details were never released. If Zebrina's men were indeed captured, their names may have been lost in classified files or misfiled among hundreds of wartime incidents. Yet no archival discovery has ever confirmed such an outcome, leaving historians with a frustrating gap. Over the decades, Zebrina's fate became part of seafaring folklore. Sailors spoke of her as one of the war's strangest mysteries, a reminder that not all dangers at sea came from enemy torpedoes or storms. The image of a cargo barge sailing on with its sails set but no crew haunted the imagination, carrying a weight of unease long after the war ended. Modern maritime historians continue to revisit the case, weighing the limited evidence against the broader patterns of wartime losses. They emphasize the oddity of a vessel found in such pristine condition, with nothing missing but the men who guided her. Some lean toward the U-boat theory, others toward accidental abandonment, but none can explain every detail to satisfaction. The unanswered silence of the Zebrina endures, captured in the image of a schooner drifting across the channel with her sails full but her deck empty, as if the sea itself had claimed her crew in a way no record could ever reveal. The High Aim 6. When a Taiwanese longline fishing boat appeared adrift off the northwest coast of Australia in January 2003, its weathered hull and still-rigged lines made it look like any other vessel returning from weeks at sea. Yet when local authorities boarded the craft, they were met with an eerie silence. The ship's engines had run down, fishing gear hung unused, and the decks carried no sign of life. The name painted on the bow read High Aim 6. The vessel was registered in Taiwan and had been active in the international waters of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Commanded by Captain Chen Tai-cheng, the boat specialized in longline fishing, a demanding trade that kept crews at sea for months at a time. Reports later confirmed that the ship had left port from Taiwan in late 2002, loaded with supplies and prepared for a lengthy voyage. Nothing in its early journey suggested trouble. Australian Maritime Patrol aircraft first spotted the vessel drifting near Broome, Western Australia, on January 8, 2003. Suspicious of its erratic movement, officials tracked its slow progression before dispatching naval officers to investigate. When they finally boarded on January 9th, they found the ship completely deserted. The galley still contained provisions, clothing lay scattered in bunks, and personal belongings were untouched. No lifeboats appeared to be missing, which made the absence of the crew even more confounding. The discovery ignited a series of urgent questions. Why would an entire crew abandon a seaworthy fishing vessel in calm waters? There were no signs of struggle, no bloodstains, and no evidence of fire or flooding. The logbook offered no clues, and communication equipment was functional but unmanned. Investigators also noted that the engine had been tampered with, as though someone had deliberately disabled it before leaving. Tracing the ship's ownership revealed more about its origins. HMS 6 was operated by a Taiwanese company, but employed mostly Indonesian fishermen as crew, a common arrangement in the region's fishing industry. Authorities eventually identified 11 Indonesians as the likely sailors under Captain Chen. None of them were found aboard, and no distress signals had been sent from the vessel during its final days at sea. Clues began to surface only weeks later. Indonesian police located a crewman named Agus, who admitted he had served aboard HMS 6 before abandoning it with other sailors. According to his testimony, the crew had staged a violent mutiny against Captain Chen and the chief engineer. He claimed both men were killed and their bodies thrown overboard before the ship was left adrift. If his account was true, it explained the absence of the senior officers, yet it left many details uncertain. Australian investigators pressed for more answers, but Agus's story raised as many doubts as it resolved. He insisted that after the killings, the remaining crew divided into groups, using smaller boats to reach Indonesian shores. However, only he was ever located, and no trace of the others surfaced. Without physical evidence or corroborating testimony, officials could not verify the mutiny claim. The vessel itself offered few solid leads. Its holds were filled with frozen fish, evidence that the crew had been actively working until the final days. Fuel tanks carried enough reserves for weeks more of travel, and navigational charts were still in place in the wheelhouse. There was nothing to suggest the kind of emergency that would force men to risk long ocean crossings in small boats. International law complicated the investigation further. Because HMS 6 was a Taiwanese registered vessel found in Australian waters, questions of jurisdiction slowed cooperation between agencies. Taiwanese authorities launched inquiries but released little information to the public. Indonesian officials, too, were limited in their ability to trace missing fishermen from remote coastal villages. The lack of transparency fed speculation across maritime circles. Some suggested piracy could not be ruled out. The seas between Southeast Asia and Northern Australia had long been vulnerable to attacks by small armed groups. Pirates often targeted fishing vessels, seizing catches or extorting crews before disappearing. Yet piracy usually left evidence of theft or violence, neither of which was present on the abandoned ship. The stores and cargo of HMS 6 remained untouched, making this theory less convincing. Maritime experts also pointed to the psychological strain of long fishing voyages. Crews lived under harsh conditions, working extended hours in isolation. Disputes between officers and crew were not uncommon, and mutiny, though rare in modern times, was not impossible. Agus's account of conflict aboard the vessel may have reflected tensions that boiled over in the middle of the ocean, though the truth of his testimony could never be confirmed. The story gained further intrigue as rumours spread among seafarers. Some claimed that the ship's movements after being deserted suggested someone had attempted to guide it toward Indonesia before abandoning it completely. Others believed the disabling of the engine pointed to deliberate sabotage designed to hide the crew's escape. Each theory hinted at human intent but lacked definitive proof. In the months after the discovery, HMS 6 was towed to Broome for closer inspection. Australian officials documented its condition and attempted to trace the missing sailors, but the trail quickly went cold. Without bodies, confessions, or reliable witnesses, the case remained suspended between rumour and fact. Eventually, the vessel was removed from headlines, leaving behind more questions than answers. Maritime historians still discuss the mystery today because it illustrates the vulnerabilities of isolated fishing fleets. Hundreds of vessels work in remote waters each year, and oversight is limited. Crews are often recruited from distant regions, poorly paid, and disconnected from international authorities. The disappearance of an entire crew, while rare, underscored how easily such incidents could vanish into bureaucratic obscurity. For the families of the missing men, the silence has been the hardest burden. No official list of their names was ever widely circulated, and compensation or recognition was minimal. Captain Chen's relatives in Taiwan, in particular, were left with little closure, as the alleged mutiny described by Agus was never legally confirmed. Their loss became one more unsolved chapter in maritime history. Speculation continues to shape the story, with some writers framing High Aim 6 as a modern ghost ship, an echo of older legends where crews vanished without a trace. The difference here lies in the sliver of testimony from Agus, whose account anchors the tale in human conflict rather than supernatural suggestion. Yet, without corroboration, his words remain only one version of events in a case clouded by uncertainty. The abandoned vessel off Australia's coast serves as a stark reminder that even in an age of satellites and radios, entire crews can still disappear into the vastness of the sea, leaving behind only a silent deck and unanswered questions. The Bellamika. The summer of 2006 brought unusual heat to the Mediterranean, and with it came a sight that startled sailors along the coast of Sardinia. A sleek, old-fashioned vessel drifted near Punta Volpe, its hull dark against the turquoise waters. From a distance it looked elegant and well-kept, as though it belonged to another era of seafaring. Yet as patrol boats approached, it became clear that no one stood on its decks. The name painted across the stern read Bellamika. When the Guardia di Finanza boarded, they expected to find signs of distress, perhaps mechanical failure or an emergency that had forced the crew away. Instead, the decks were immaculate and silent. There were no footprints in the dust that had settled on certain surfaces, no scattered tools or broken rigging. The sails were down, the lines coiled neatly, and the wheel locked in place. Everything suggested the ship had been left carefully rather than hurriedly abandoned. Inside the cabin, officers discovered half-eaten meals, clothing, and navigation charts. These small details hinted that whoever had been aboard had departed suddenly. Most striking of all were the personal items left behind, which included expensive sunglasses, Italian literature, and bottles of mineral water stacked in a corner. Nothing had been ransacked or stolen, which ruled out the immediate suspicion of piracy. The absence of a crew alarmed authorities, but another discovery added to the intrigue. Onboard documents indicated that the vessel was not registered in Italy, despite its presence near Sardinia. Instead, its papers linked it to Luxembourg, a landlocked country with no coastline. The oddity of a Mediterranean yacht tied to such a nation sparked questions about its ownership and purpose. The ship itself did not look modern. Its design reflected older styling, with wood trim and details rarely seen in contemporary builds. At first glance, some believed they had stumbled upon a true ghost ship from centuries past. Newspapers picked up the story quickly, comparing the vessel to maritime legends where ships drift endlessly without crews. The image of Bellamika floating near a sun-soaked coast caught the imagination of readers across Europe. Investigation soon uncovered a name linked to the yacht. Authorities identified its owner as a man from Luxembourg who had connections to Italy. Reports suggested that he had not officially registered the vessel in the Mediterranean, which meant it had been sailing under irregular conditions. This fact raised suspicion that tax avoidance might have played a role in the abandonment, though no official charges were made public at the time. Despite these findings, the mystery of why the crew left remained unsolved. The food left on the table suggested a quick departure, as though something had interrupted a meal. Yet there were no signs of danger, no distress signals sent to the Coast Guard, and no technical failure that could explain why a seaworthy yacht was left adrift. Local fishermen, who had watched the authorities tow the vessel to shore, speculated freely. Some believed smugglers might have used it to move contraband before escaping to land. Others whispered about financial disputes or hidden debts that had forced the abandonment. Without a clear narrative, the rumour mill flourished, and the story of Bellamika began to merge fact with legend. Once the yacht was secured, officials conducted further searches but found nothing unusual beyond what had already been reported. The presence of books, household goods, and other belongings gave the impression of long voyages or even a family's use of the vessel. This deepened the puzzle because whoever had taken such care to outfit the yacht had not returned to claim it. The press continued to publish updates in the weeks that followed, often highlighting the strangeness of a luxury vessel left adrift without explanation. Italian newspapers described it as a phantom ship and emphasised its ghostly appearance when discovered. International outlets picked up the story as well, drawing comparisons to famous abandoned ships from the past. Interest from the public grew so intense that sightseers travelled to the harbour where Bellamika was held, hoping to glimpse the mysterious yacht for themselves. The sleek shape of its hull and the silence that seemed to cling to it only reinforced the sense that it carried secrets. For many, it was less a real boat than a symbol of the enduring mysteries of the sea. Officials eventually traced the owner, but the explanation offered did not satisfy everyone. Reports indicated that the vessel had been left because of bureaucratic issues, and the owner's failure to pay required taxes or register properly in Italy. While this offered a plausible motive for leaving the yacht adrift, it did not explain the abandoned meals or the suddenness of the crew's disappearance. Questions lingered about the crew members themselves. Their identities were never made fully public, and no one came forward to describe what had happened in the final hours aboard. Without testimony, the details of their departure remained speculative. Did they slip quietly into a smaller boat to avoid authorities? Or did something unexpected occur that forced them away from the yacht in haste? The ambiguity of the case ensured that the story lived on long after the official investigation closed. While some accepted the tax dispute theory as the most likely explanation, others continued to treat Bellamika as a true ghost ship of the modern age. Its appearance near Sardinia had all the hallmarks of a maritime mystery: an empty deck, meals frozen in time, and a ship adrift under the sun. In the years since, Bellamika has been remembered less for its bureaucratic entanglements and more for the aura of uncertainty that surrounded it. Unlike vessels lost in storms or destroyed in battle, it arrived in perfect condition, untouched by weather or violence. That very perfection made the absence of its crew more haunting. Even today, the story of the yacht drifts between official record and whispered speculation, reminding sailors and travellers alike that sometimes the most unsettling mysteries are not those hidden beneath the waves, but those that appear suddenly, fully formed in the clear light of day. The Tainmouth Electron. On the waters of the Atlantic in July 1969, a small yacht drifted silently, its sails slack and its interior strangely still. The vessel was the Tainmouth Electron, once full of promise as part of a bold attempt to sail alone around the world. When searchers boarded her, they found no captain, no crew, and only a trail of unsettling clues left behind in the logbooks. The yacht became a haunting reminder that not all maritime journeys end in triumph, and sometimes the sea swallows its mysteries without warning. The story of the Tainmouth Electron begins with Donald Crowhurst, an ambitious amateur sailor from England. He had entered the 1968 Sunday Times Golden Globe race, the first non-stop solo round-the-world sailing contest. Unlike some of his competitors, Crowhurst did not have years of professional sailing experience. Instead, he was an electronics engineer with a restless drive to prove himself, and the race offered the stage he needed. Winning meant fame, sponsorship, and financial security. Losing, however, carried risks that would soon prove devastating. Crowhurst's yacht was not a massive ironclad vessel built for the roughest seas, but a trimaran, a lighter, three-hulled craft that many considered risky for such a brutal test. He named it the Tainmouth Electron after his hometown in Devon and his work in electronics. Before he even set out, doubts surrounded his chances of survival. Friends and fellow sailors questioned whether the boat could endure the Southern Ocean, where waves rose like mountains and storms struck with little warning. From the start of the race in October 1968, Crowhurst lagged behind the leaders. Other competitors, such as Robin Knox-Johnston and Bernard Moitessier, gained ground, while the Tainmouth Electron faced constant technical issues. Crowhurst tried to repair equipment as best as he could, but his navigation systems and self-steering gear failed repeatedly. Each problem slowed his progress, and as weeks turned into months, the pressure mounted. He had mortgaged his home and risked his family's financial future to enter the race. Dropping out would have meant ruin. It was at this point that Crowhurst began to make a fateful decision. Instead of continuing on the treacherous route toward the roaring 40s of the Southern Hemisphere, he chose to linger in the Atlantic. He began falsifying his position reports, sending messages that suggested he was circling the globe when, In truth, he remained far from the danger zones. The deception was elaborate, and for a time it seemed to work. His logs showed speeds and progress that matched the leaders, while in reality he was drifting in safer waters. As the months wore on, the psychological toll grew heavier. Crowhurst kept 2 sets of logbooks, one real, describing his true position and struggles, and one false, crafted to match the image of a successful voyage. This double life weighed on him, and his writings reveal a man unravelling under the strain. At times, his entries wandered into philosophy, mathematics, and strange reflections on human existence. The contrast between the calm seas around him and the storm inside his mind became sharper with every passing day. In June 1969, the deception collapsed. Other competitors had withdrawn, and Crowhurst's falsified position placed him in a position to win the race outright. He would have been celebrated as the fastest man to circle the globe, but he knew his logs could not withstand inspection. Exposure seemed inevitable, and with it, public humiliation. The log entries from his final days reveal a mind spiralling into despair. Thoughts of cosmic destiny and abstract visions filled his pages, far removed from the practical needs of survival at sea. On July 10, 1969, a passing ship discovered the Tainmouth Electron adrift in the mid-Atlantic. When rescuers boarded, they found Crowhurst's personal belongings, including his logbooks, intact but scattered. Food supplies remained, as did his clothes and equipment. There was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of foul play, and no indication of where Crowhurst had gone. The only trail left behind was in his writings, which suggested he had reached a breaking point and may have stepped into the sea. The recovery of the yacht sparked widespread coverage across Britain and beyond. Knox Johnston, who went on to win the Golden Globe race as the only sailor to finish, donated his prize money to Crowhurst's family. The contrast between Crowhurst's tragedy and Knox Johnston's triumph deepened the sense of sorrow surrounding the Tainmouth Electron. The yacht itself, once built to prove a man's skill and determination, had become instead a drifting monument to human fragility under impossible pressure. In the years that followed, the Tainmouth Electron remained a symbol of unanswered questions. It passed into private ownership and at times was left to decay, its faded hull a quiet relic of a story many found too haunting to forget. Writers, filmmakers and historians have returned again and again to the mystery, debating whether Crowhurst's actions were born of desperation, madness, or a final act of control in a race that had spun beyond his reach. The empty yacht rests at the centre of that debate, carrying with it the memory of a man who sought glory and instead found himself trapped between his ambition and the unrelenting truth of the ocean. Its silent drift across the Atlantic marked not only the end of one sailor's dream, but also the birth of a maritime mystery that refuses to be settled. Somewhere in the gap between his last coherent entry and his disappearance, Donald Crowhurst left behind a puzzle the sea has never given back. The Tainmouth Electron still lingers in memory as if it holds the unanswered riddle of a man who vanished into the Atlantic without leaving a trace of his final choice. The Malborough. Known for its great void, the South Pacific surrounds ships with unbroken horizons, its winds guiding them into seas where loneliness reigns. It was in this expanse that the British full-rigged ship Malborough vanished in 1890, leaving behind one of the strangest maritime mysteries of the late 19th century. Unlike ships that went down in storms or ran aground, the Malborough simply disappeared, sparking speculation that has lasted for more than a century. The Malborough was built in Glasgow in 1876, a sturdy vessel designed for long voyages. With her iron hull and 3 masts, she was part of the merchant fleet that carried goods across the globe during the height of Britain's trading power. Ships like hers were built to endure months at sea, carrying passengers, wool, and produce between New Zealand and the United Kingdom. She was considered strong and dependable, which made her disappearance all the more baffling. In January 1890, the Malborough left Lyttelton, New Zealand, under the command of Captain Anderson. On board were 29 crew members and passengers, their journey set for London with a cargo of frozen meat and wool. The voyage was a familiar route for New Zealand traders, and there was little expectation of trouble. The ship sailed into the Southern Ocean, and after clearing New Zealand's coasts, it was expected to follow the typical course around Cape Horn before heading north into the Atlantic. That was the last anyone saw of her. Months passed, and the Malborough never arrived in London. Shipping agents waited for news, but none came. The ship was overdue, then missing, then presumed lost. No wreckage washed ashore, no lifeboats were discovered, and no survivor ever sent word. For a vessel of her size, such total silence was unsettling. The absence of evidence left only questions. Had she gone down in a sudden storm near Cape Horn? Had icebergs torn her hull in the southern seas? Or was there another explanation, hidden far from the normal trade routes? The first strange reports emerged nearly 2 decades later. In 1913, a passing ship, the British bark Johnson, claimed to have come across a ghostly sight near Cape Horn. According to accounts, the crew saw a derelict ship partly sunken, her hull showing the name Malborough. Inside were skeletal remains suggesting those on board had perished long before. The vessel had supposedly been trapped in an isolated bay, shielded from discovery by cliffs and rough seas. The story spread quickly, and newspapers relayed the tale of a ship frozen in time, crew reduced to bones still at their posts. Sailors and historians debated the credibility of this sighting. Some argued that the Johnson's crew could have mistaken another vessel for the Malborough, as many 19th century ships shared similar lines and structure. Others pointed to the eerie detail of skeletons found aboard, suggesting such a story was too vivid to be fabricated entirely. Still, no official confirmation was ever made, and the Johnson's reported sighting remains a tale passed between mariners rather than a verified fact. The geography of Cape Horn adds weight to the mystery. Its channels, fjords, and hidden inlets form a labyrinth where a ship could vanish without a trace. The region is notorious for sudden storms, dense fog, and unpredictable currents. If the Malborough had been driven into one of these isolated bays and stranded, it is possible that no one would have found her for years. The idea of a ship slowly decaying in silence, cut off from shipping lanes, gave the story a haunting plausibility. Other theories arose as well. Some believed the Malborough may have been lost to ice in the Southern Ocean, far from Cape Horn, her remains dragged under before anything could surface. Others suggested she could have caught fire or been struck by a rogue wave. With no wreckage ever recovered, each theory remained speculation. What makes her case unusual is not simply that she was lost, but that later accounts insisted she was seen again, adrift and full of bones, long after she'd been given up for dead. The legend of the Malborough gained momentum because it fit into the long tradition of ghost ship stories. Maritime culture is full of tales where vessels are found abandoned, their crews vanished, or where ships drift for years as floating tombs. Yet most of those stories are easily dismissed as exaggeration or misreporting. The Malborough's story clung closer to reality because she was a real ship with a documented voyage, and her disappearance was recorded in official shipping records. The possibility that she may have been rediscovered decades later made her tale harder to dismiss. Not a fragment of the Malborough has been found, even after all these years. No ship's bell, no cargo, and no trace of her iron hull have been identified on the wild coasts of South America. The story remains caught between fact and folklore, bolstered by the lack of answers. Sailors who pass Cape Horn still speak of ships that vanish into its rocky coves, never to return, and the Malborough has become one of the most enduring examples of such tales. What makes her disappearance resonate is not only the mystery of her fate, but the imagined horror of her final days. The thought of a crew stranded in an unforgiving landscape, slowly succumbing to hunger, cold, or disease before their ship became a drifting graveyard, has left an indelible mark on maritime history. Whether the Johnson truly saw her in 1913 or not, the Malborough continues to live on in that shadowy space where history and myth blur. The South Pacific and Cape Horn hold many secrets, and the Malborough remains one of the most unsettling, her voyage ending not in arrival but in silence that has never been broken. In the turbulent seas by Cape Horn, the Malborough's fate endures like an unfinished narrative, with evidence that has yet to be found. The Baychimo. The Arctic is a place where the sea does not always behave like water. Vast sheets of ice close around ships, trapping them for weeks or even years. It was in this unforgiving world that the Baychimo became one of the strangest ghost ships in modern memory, drifting for decades across the frozen north, sighted by hunters, sailors, and explorers long after she was thought lost. Her story stands apart because she was not a relic from centuries past, but a 20th century cargo vessel abandoned yet still refusing to vanish. The Baychimo was built in Sweden in 1914 and first served under the name Angermanelfen. After World War I, she was transferred to the Hudson's Bay Company and renamed Baychimo. The steel-hulled ship became part of the company's Arctic trade, transporting furs, goods and supplies to remote settlements across northern Canada. Designed for cold waters but not for heavy ice-breaking, she worked seasonal routes, often sailing close to the edges of pack ice. For more than a decade, she completed her voyages without incident, until one fateful autumn in 1931. That year, Baychimo was operating along the coast of the Northwest Territories near Barrow, Alaska, when she became trapped by early sea ice in October. Captain Cornwall and his crew initially tried to wait for a thaw, but conditions only worsened. The vessel was at risk of being crushed, and the company arranged for an airlift to remove most of the crew. A small group stayed behind in makeshift shelters on the ice, hoping to salvage the ship if the weather improved. It was a dangerous choice, with temperatures plummeting and supplies running thin. When a sudden storm swept across the region, the men left in camp lost sight of Baychimo. For a time, they thought she'd gone down, swallowed by the Arctic. But when the skies cleared, the ship had broken free of the ice and drifted away. Efforts to track her down proved futile. It seemed Baychimo had slipped from human control, moving under the whims of current and wind, beginning a second life as a wandering ghost of the north. What made Baychimo remarkable was not just her abandonment, but her persistence. Over the next several decades, reports surfaced of her appearing along different stretches of the Arctic coast. In 1932, Inuit hunters encountered her still afloat, eerily intact. Later sightings came from prospectors, explorers, and even other ships. Each account described her as weathered yet seaworthy, a steel phantom that refused to sink. She earned a reputation as the ghost ship of the Arctic, a vessel that seemed to have outlived her crew and purpose. One of the most detailed encounters came in the 1930s, when a group of Alaskan Inuit boarded Baychimo and found her cargo hold still carrying furs. They retrieved what they could, though the ship itself remained adrift. Other would-be salvagers also tried to claim her, but the ice and unpredictable conditions made such attempts nearly impossible. On more than one occasion, people who came close to Baychimo had to abandon their efforts for fear of being trapped themselves, leaving her to drift on. Through the 1940s and 1950s, the ship became part of northern folklore. Stories circulated among communities along the coast about spotting her silhouette against the ice fields. Some tales claimed she appeared out of fog, only to disappear again days later, carried farther out to sea. For many who lived in the Arctic, Baychimo became a familiar name, a reminder of how small human efforts could seem against the forces of ice and ocean. By the 1960s, Baychimo had achieved near legendary status. Unlike older ghost ship stories tied to distant centuries, her sightings were contemporary, told by living witnesses. In 1969, the ship was seen once more, this time stuck in pack ice near Point Barrow. After that, her trail seemed to go cold. No confirmed reports followed, and the Arctic slowly absorbed the last traces of her. Unresolved to this day, Baychimo's fate is still debated. Some say she slipped beneath the ice-choked waters, her steel frame swallowed by the frozen sea. Others suspect she may still rest, rusting but intact on the seabed somewhere off the Alaskan coast. A few hold on to the possibility that she drifted farther afield, her remains scattered in places no one has yet searched. What sets her apart is that she existed not as a legend from the age of sail, but as a modern vessel documented in photographs and shipping records, yet her final resting place has never been found. In recent years, the mystery of Baychimo has drawn the attention of historians and Arctic researchers. Efforts have been made to track down possible wreck sites, but the vastness of the region makes such searches difficult. Shifting ice, extreme weather, and limited access continue to stand in the way. The Hudson's Bay Company records end with her abandonment, leaving the rest of her tale written only in scattered sightings and hearsay. Baychimo's legacy endures because she is a reminder of how easily even modern technology can be humbled by nature. A steel ship abandoned in one of the harshest environments on Earth managed to survive storms, collisions with ice, and decades adrift. Each sighting kept alive the unsettling thought that somewhere in the frozen north, a crewless vessel still wandered, carrying with it unanswered questions. The Arctic has many stories of survival and loss, but the Baychimo holds a unique place among them. her long drift across the ice making her one of the strangest maritime mysteries of the 20th century. Out on the shifting frontier of ice and sea, Baychimo's shadow still lingers, as though the Arctic itself is not yet ready to release her secret. The SV Seabird. On the morning of August 15, 1750, the people of Newport, Rhode Island, noticed a ship riding quietly at anchor just outside the harbour. The vessel seemed perfectly stable, sails neatly arranged, and nothing about it suggested distress. Yet, as hours passed, no one came ashore, no signals were sent, and the craft sat unnervingly silent on the water. That silence became the first sign that something was terribly wrong. When a boarding party was finally sent out to investigate, they found the ship's decks deserted. The vessel was the SV Seabird, a merchant brig that had sailed out of England and made many Atlantic crossings. Her cargo was intact, the rigging in good order, and the crew's belongings were undisturbed. Unlike a vessel wrecked in a storm or attacked by raiders, the Seabird showed no trace of violence. It was as though her crew had simply vanished mid-journey, leaving the ship to drift into the harbour alone. The scene puzzled the men who stepped aboard. In the galley, food remained half-prepared, as if someone had been interrupted while cooking. A dog was discovered wandering the deck, healthy and calm but entirely alone. The lifeboats hung in place, showing no signs of hurried escape. Even the ship's log offered no final message, with entries ending abruptly days before. Everything suggested routine life aboard had carried on normally until it hadn't. Sailors who examined the rigging noticed that the sails had been carefully set and secured, showing no signs of a hurried manoeuvre or sudden storm damage. The ship's compass and navigation tools were still in their proper places, as if the officers had been using them shortly before vanishing. This absence of chaos suggested that the crew had not left under duress, but rather in circumstances that remain completely unclear. Local mariners could not agree on what might have happened. Some speculated that disease had struck, claiming the crew so suddenly that they were cast overboard. Others believed the sailors abandoned ship after a hallucination or false alarm, but the evidence of food in mid-preparation and the untouched lifeboats made those theories difficult to accept. Nothing pointed to panic or a desperate flight. Instead, the vessel looked carefully maintained until the very last moment. As word spread, Newport became gripped by the mystery. Residents came down to the harbour to see the abandoned brig for themselves, crowding the docks with questions. For a seafaring community, the sight carried an uncanny weight. Ships were often lost to storms, but rarely did one arrive safely with its sails and structure intact, only to be missing every soul who had sailed it. That contradiction kept the story alive long after the Seabird was brought to shore. Maritime historians later tried to piece together the vessel's final days. Some suggested that the crew may have taken to the water to avoid a sudden threat such as fire, only to meet their end at sea. Yet no burn marks were found on the wood, and no cargo bore the scars of smoke. Others raised the idea of piracy, though the cargo's safety and the lack of damage stood firmly against that explanation. Each possibility seemed to collapse under the weight of the facts. Another explanation that circulated was mutiny, with the idea that the crew had turned on its officers and fled. Yet this too lacked evidence, since valuables remained untouched, and no blood or signs of conflict marked the decks. The more the case was examined, the more it appeared that the men had stepped away without struggle, leaving behind a ship that could easily have carried them home. The Seabird itself had a reputation as a capable and well-built brig. Constructed in Europe and used in trade across the Atlantic, it was not a ship known for poor handling or dangerous design. Experienced sailors had manned her during previous voyages, and there was no reason to believe this crossing would have been any different. That made the abandonment even harder to understand, since the crew would not likely have left a seaworthy ship near land unless forced by something extraordinary. Accounts of the case appeared in New England newspapers, giving the abandoned vessel a new life as a local legend. In the years that followed, stories of the Seabird circulated widely, sometimes altered in the telling. Some claimed the captain's chair still sat warm when the boarding party arrived, or that smoke had been spotted rising before the ship drifted into Newport. While these details cannot be confirmed, their spread showed how the story took on a haunting quality beyond the bare facts. The mystery also found its way into maritime lore as a precursor to other tales of ghost ships. Long before the Mary Celeste crossed the Atlantic and entered history with its own puzzle, The Seabird had already set the stage for a narrative of vessels arriving without their crews. Sailors began to view the ocean not only as a place of storms and shipwrecks, but also as a stage for disappearances that left no clear answers. The Seabird became one of the earliest American examples of that unsettling pattern. No one ever identified the true fate of the men who once worked her decks. Their names were never recorded in detail, and their final moments remain absent from any log or letter. What lingers instead is the image of a perfectly sound brig, dog roaming her deck, sails catching the wind, drifting calmly into Newport Harbour without a single sailor left aboard. The Seabird's silent arrival remains a question that has never been answered, a reminder that sometimes the sea keeps its secrets locked away forever. The HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. Under the grey Arctic sky, the sea often appears endless and hostile, with drifting ice floes that groan and crack as the current pushes them along. Into this world of shifting danger sailed two proud vessels of the British Royal Navy, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, setting out to chart the final blank spaces of the Northwest Passage. Their fate, however, would become one of the darkest mysteries in maritime history. The expedition was commanded by Sir John Franklin, a naval officer with decades of experience and a reputation for perseverance. In May 1845, the ships departed Greenhithe, England, with 129 men on board. Both Erebus and Terror had been strengthened for ice navigation, fitted with iron plating, reinforced bows, and even steam engines taken from railway locomotives to drive their screw propellers. The Admiralty spared no expense, believing these ships represented the peak of polar exploration technology. For the first weeks, the voyage seemed to go as planned. Records show that the expedition stopped in Stromness, Orkney, then later at Disco Bay in Greenland, where the crew stocked up on provisions and sent their last letters home. Whalers who encountered the ships in Baffin Bay in late July 1845 would be the last Europeans to see Franklin and his men alive. After that, silence closed in, and the expedition vanished into the Arctic ice. Back in Britain, no immediate alarm was raised. It was common for polar voyages to take years before returning, and Franklin's men carried enough supplies to last 3. But as time stretched on with no word, families pressed the Admiralty to act. By 1848, the first search expeditions were dispatched to trace the route. Each mission brought back fragments of information, but no clear answers, only deepening the sense of dread surrounding the ship's disappearance. One of the earliest discoveries came in 1850, when searchers found 3 graves on Beechey Island, dated from the winter of 1845-1846. The markers belonged to John Torrington, John Hartnell, and William Brain. Their well-preserved bodies, later examined, showed signs of lead poisoning, possibly from tinned food or the ship's water systems. This raised questions about whether the very supplies meant to sustain the men instead contributed to their downfall. Further north, Inuit oral testimony began to play a vital role in piecing together the tragedy. Local groups reported encounters with starving Englishmen dragging sledges across the ice, some barely alive and others already dead. These stories described scenes of exhaustion and despair, suggesting that the crews had abandoned their ships after they became trapped. The accounts painted a haunting picture, one that official records would later confirm. In 1859, searchers led by Francis Leopold McClintock found a crucial clue on King William Island, a written note left in a cairn. The message, dated April 1847, stated that all was well, but a later edition from April 1848 revealed the grim truth. Franklin had died the year before, and the surviving officers and men, now led by Captain Francis Crozier and Captain James Fitzjames, had deserted the ships, hoping to march south towards safety. Of the 129 who had sailed, none would survive the journey. Despite these revelations, the Erebus and Terror themselves remained missing for generations. Searchers scoured the Arctic for signs of the wrecks, but the ice concealed them. The mystery endured, fueled by speculation about cannibalism, which was supported by Inuit testimony and later confirmed by cut marks on human remains. Each discovery seemed to answer one question only to raise another, and the ships became ghostly symbols of failure and loss. More than a century later, technology brought new breakthroughs. In 2014, a Canadian search team located HMS Erebus in the Queen Maud Gulf, resting in shallow waters. The wreck was remarkably well preserved, with much of its structure intact. 2 years later, HMS Terror was found in Terror Bay on the south coast of King William Island. This vessel too lay undisturbed, its masts still standing and its interior seemingly frozen in time. Archaeologists who explored the sites were astonished by their condition. Plates, bottles, and even parts of the ship's cabins remained in place, shielded by the icy waters. The discoveries allowed historians to reconstruct more of the expedition's final months and gave weight to the Inuit accounts that had been dismissed for so long. Yet the wrecks also held back their secrets, raising questions about why the ships had drifted far apart and why the men had chosen to abandon them when they still seemed seaworthy. The wrecks are now protected heritage sites, but they remain difficult to access, resting in icy waters that freeze over much of the year. Each expedition into their hulls reveals small details, boots, clothing, weapons, but no single discovery has yet explained the chain of decisions that led to the complete loss of Franklin's command. The answers may remain trapped in the permafrost or hidden in the silt that covers the wreck's lower decks. For the families of the men, the mystery lingered long after the expedition's failure. Letters written before departure carried words of hope and pride, unaware of the suffering that would follow. In Britain, memorials were raised, and Franklin was celebrated as a national hero, though debate continues over whether his leadership contributed to the tragedy. For the Inuit, the story has long been part of oral history, preserved through generations who watched foreign sailors die in a land they could not master. The enduring fascination with Erebus and Terror lies not only in the fate of their crews, but also in the eerie preservation of their story, half told through artifacts and half through silence. Every discovery promises clarity, yet each also reminds us how much remains hidden in the frozen north. The ships, long lost to the ice, now rest as monuments to ambition, survival, and the unknown, holding mysteries that continue to resist final explanation. Amid the drifting ice of the Arctic, the Erebus and Terror endure, their last secrets buried in cold and shadow. The La Graciosa ghost ship. On the northwestern edge of Lanzarote, across a narrow strait of restless water, lies the small island of La Graciosa. It is a place known for its calm beaches and rugged volcanic terrain. Yet in 1919, the islanders woke to a sight that unsettled them deeply. A large sailing ship drifted silently near their shore, its sails hanging limp, and no voices could be heard above the waves. Villagers gathered along the sand, watching with unease as the vessel edged closer, carried only by the current. The ship appeared well built and seaworthy, but no signals were raised from its deck. Local fishermen rowed out, wary but curious, climbing aboard to investigate. What they found was strange and disturbing. The vessel was deserted, with no trace of its crew. The cabins held scattered belongings, signs of sudden departure or chaos, yet nothing explained why the sailors had left so completely. Food and water remained in stores, and the hull showed no damage that would have forced an evacuation. News of the derelict spread quickly across the Canary Islands, where tales of ghost ships were already part of seafaring lore. Yet this case was not a distant legend. It was a real ship lying in clear sight of La Graciosa's people. Efforts were made to identify the vessel, but records proved elusive. Some claimed it was of French origin, while others suspected it had sailed from South America. Without documentation or survivors, its story remained locked away, leaving only speculation about the events that drove the crew to abandon it. Witnesses described the eerie silence aboard the ship as one of its most unsettling features. The creak of timbers and the wash of waves against the hull were the only sounds. Everything else suggested absence, as if life had been carefully erased. Beds were unmade, tools lay out on tables, and navigational charts hinted at a voyage that had ended abruptly. The absence of logbooks deepened the puzzle, as if someone had taken deliberate care to remove the written record of what had occurred. The sails were still in place, though they sagged loosely against the masts as if left halfway through adjustment. Lines of rigging hung without tension, yet none appeared frayed or broken. The spars and masts showed no sign of stress or splintering, which would normally point to heavy storms. To anyone inspecting the vessel, it looked as though the crew had been interrupted in the middle of their work, abandoning everything at once without time to secure the ship properly. Authorities debated possible explanations. Some believed piracy might have played a role, although no signs of violence or plunder were found. Others speculated that disease had struck, forcing the crew to flee in lifeboats, but no small boats were missing. Natural disasters, such as sudden storms or waterspouts, were also considered, yet the ship bore no scars of violent weather. Each possibility failed to align with the evidence, leaving only the uncomfortable reality of an unexplained desertion. Local legends soon surrounded the abandoned vessel. Fishermen whispered of lights seen flickering on its deck at night, long after it had been emptied of men. Children were warned not to approach it, told that the souls of its crew still roamed its cabins. These tales merged with older maritime folklore, reinforcing the idea that the sea sometimes swallows people without leaving behind reasons that can be grasped. For La Graciosa, the ship became both a curiosity and a shadow over daily life. Eventually, efforts were made to salvage what could be taken. Islanders stripped useful materials, wood, rope and canvas. But the larger mystery lingered. The hull, once a vessel of purpose, became a silent monument to whatever fate had claimed its crew. Over time, the wreck faded from memory, consumed by the sea and forgotten by most, except in the stories told along the coastlines of the Canaries. Unlike many other maritime puzzles, the La Graciosa ghost ship is marked by an absence of both violence and survivors. Many derelicts bear scars of storms or struggle, yet this vessel seemed left in perfect condition, abandoned as though its sailors had walked away without urgency. That detail has troubled historians and storytellers alike, for it suggests motives and fears we cannot see, hidden in the choices of men now long gone. Local newspapers in Spain picked up fragments of the story, but the details shifted from one publication to another. Some described the vessel as a Mediterranean trader, while others suggested it had crossed from the Caribbean, carried by the currents into Canary waters. No official records matched these claims, and no owner or shipping line came forward to take responsibility. The lack of consistency in the reports only added to the sense that the La Graciosa ghost ship was a mystery no one could neatly explain. The incident left no documents in official archives to clarify the ship's name, origin, or purpose, which has only added to its strange aura. Without a concrete identity, the vessel became a canvas for rumour. Was it a cargo ship running from unseen pursuers? A vessel smuggling goods across the Atlantic that met with misfortune? Or perhaps a more personal tragedy unfolded, one that left no survivors to tell the tale. Over a century later, the story still clings to La Graciosa's history. The ship itself is gone, but the memory of its sudden and unexplained arrival continues to unsettle those who hear it. The silence of its decks, the intact stores of food and water, and the missing crew combine into a riddle without resolution. The Atlantic has claimed many secrets, but few remain as haunting as the nameless vessel that appeared at La Graciosa, carrying nothing but questions across the waves. The SV Seabreeze. On a September morning in 2009, the turquoise waters near the Dominican Republic appeared calm, the surface broken only by distant fishing boats and the occasional swell. Among that quiet expanse, the Seabreeze drifted without direction, its sails slack and its radio silent, giving the impression of a vessel abandoned to the sea. To passing sailors, the sight of a yacht adrift with no movement on deck immediately sparked unease. When authorities boarded the vessel, they expected to find a mechanical issue or a stranded crew waiting for help. Instead, what they encountered was a silence deeper than the waves around them. The Seabreeze carried no passengers. The cabin was in order, personal belongings were in place, and the galley showed signs of recent use. Nothing suggested a struggle, yet there was also no sign of where the crew had gone. The yacht's paperwork revealed it was registered in Canada and had departed from Barbados. Its course should have kept it on a well-travelled route across the Caribbean, where traffic from cargo ships, fishing vessels and leisure craft is frequent. For such a ship to be discovered empty in those waters suggested something more than an accident or mechanical failure. Search and rescue teams were quickly dispatched after the discovery. Aircraft scanned the surrounding sea while Coast Guard patrols traced possible drift patterns. Despite these efforts, no survivors, bodies or lifeboats were located. The search expanded across hundreds of miles, yet the ocean gave back nothing, leaving investigators with little more than the vessel itself. Inside the Seabreeze, details added to the puzzle. Food remained in the kitchen area, and navigation equipment was intact. The logbook, often a key piece in maritime investigations, was present but offered little. Its final entries were routine, noting weather conditions and course adjustments, with no hint of impending trouble. The lack of distress calls further complicated matters, as the yacht's radio was functional and capable of transmitting an emergency signal. Experts studying the case considered several possibilities. One theory suggested that the crew may have abandoned ship due to fear of sinking, perhaps after believing the yacht had taken on too much water. But the hull was sound, and the bilge pumps worked as expected. Another idea involved piracy, though investigators found no evidence of theft or forced entry. Valuables remained untouched, undermining the idea of an attack. Family members of those aboard faced an agonizing absence of answers. Relatives described the crew as experienced sailors who knew the waters well and were unlikely to panic without reason. They had prepared thoroughly for the journey with supplies, safety gear, and regular communication equipment. That knowledge made the sudden silence and empty yacht all the more devastating for those left waiting. Maritime investigators also examined the possibility of foul weather. Sudden squalls in the Caribbean can overturn small craft, forcing crews into the sea. However, weather records for the area during the yacht's disappearance showed no storms strong enough to explain the abandonment. The conditions were relatively stable, and nearby vessels did not report dangerous seas. Some speculated about a more unusual explanation, such as rogue waves or underwater turbulence. While these phenomena can occur in deep waters, they are less common along the Caribbean routes frequented by yachts like the Seabreeze. Without damage to the vessel or signs of capsizing, the rogue wave theory carried little weight. Still, the idea lingers as sailors recall rare but powerful walls of water rising without warning. The discovery of the Seabreeze joined a long history of ghost ships recorded around the world. From the Mary Celeste in the 19th century to smaller modern craft, vessels have been found adrift with no crew and no clear answers. Each case feeds maritime folklore, with theories ranging from the rational to the supernatural. The Seabreeze added its name to this unsettling list, reminding sailors of the ocean's ability to erase lives without leaving evidence. As news of the mystery spread, it stirred debate among maritime circles. Some saw it as a tragic accident where the crew may have gone overboard during routine work on deck, unnoticed by one another until it was too late. If multiple people were lost in quick succession, panic could have driven the rest into a failed attempt at rescue. The absence of life jackets in use suggested they had little time to react. Others pointed to the eerie precision with which the yacht remained preserved. Unlike many abandoned vessels, which often show chaos in their cabins, the Seabreeze appeared undisturbed, almost staged. Everything was tidy, navigation charts in place, and the anchor secured. That sense of order made the absence of crew feel even more unsettling, as though they had simply vanished without disrupting their surroundings. Years have passed since the Seabreeze was found, yet the fate of its crew remains unknown. No wreckage, no personal effects, and no verified sightings have surfaced to fill the void. The case lives on in discussions of unexplained maritime events, standing beside other enigmas that defy resolution. The sea, vast and indifferent, keeps its silence, offering only the image of a yacht adrift under a bright Caribbean sky. The Seabreeze drifts not only in memory, but also in the uncharted space between fact and speculation, leaving behind a story that feels less like a solved incident and more like a wound the ocean refuses to close. The Palatine Light. Along the cold Atlantic waters near Block Island, Rhode Island, a strange sight has unsettled locals for centuries. On winter nights, when the wind whips across the waves and the shoreline is cloaked in darkness, fishermen and islanders claim to see a burning ship drifting offshore. The apparition glows with the outline of masts and rigging, engulfed in flames yet never consumed, before vanishing into the night. The legend is tied to a real vessel from the 18th century, the Princess Augusta. In 1738, the ship sailed from Germany carrying immigrants bound for Pennsylvania. Disease and hunger plagued the voyage, and poor conditions left passengers weak long before they reached North America. Their journey, meant to offer a new beginning, became a march of suffering across the ocean. Historical records suggest that by the time the Princess Augusta reached the American coast, a large number of those on board had already died. The survivors were desperate, exhausted, and mistrustful of the captain and crew, who were accused of mistreatment. Accounts differ on how the ship came to its end. but all agree it drifted towards Rhode Island under dire circumstances. Local tradition tells that the vessel wrecked near Block Island during December, scattering survivors onto the shore. Some narratives describe islanders offering help, while others accuse them of stripping the ship and leaving passengers to perish in the cold. The conflicting versions became part of the island's folklore, casting both mercy and betrayal into the story of the wreck. Over time, the tale of the Princess Augusta merged with the vision of the fiery phantom ship, later known as the Palatine Light. Islanders insisted they had seen the burning silhouette on countless winter evenings. The light was said to hover offshore before flickering and disappearing, as if replaying the ship's tragic fate. Writers and historians took interest in the phenomenon during the 19th century. John Greenleaf Whittier, the American poet, preserved the legend in his 1867 poem The Palatine. His verses described the ghostly vessel drifting endlessly, its flames a reminder of suffering and betrayal. The poem gave the legend permanence, carrying it beyond Block Island and fixing it into American folklore. Skeptics offered alternative explanations. Some suggested that the Palatine Light might be a natural optical effect, with gases or light reflecting off the sea creating the illusion of a burning ship. Others argued that fishermen's lanterns or distant ships could be mistaken for something spectral. Yet these practical answers never fully erased the conviction of those who swore they had witnessed the phantom themselves. Eyewitness reports persisted well into the 20th century. Residents described the light in vivid detail, claiming it would sometimes appear so clearly that they expected to hear voices or cries from those aboard. Stories circulated of men rowing toward the apparition only to find themselves surrounded by empty water once they drew close. Such testimonies deepened the mystery, blurring the line between folklore and lived experience. The legend also carried a moral undertone. For those who believed islanders had mistreated the survivors of the wreck, the Palatine Light was seen as a haunting reminder of guilt. The burning ship symbolized punishment for cruelty, returning again and again as a fiery accusation. For others, it represented the endurance of suffering souls, refusing to be forgotten by history. In the archives of Rhode Island's colonial past, the Princess Augusta is documented as a real vessel, though not all details align perfectly with the folklore. Maritime records mention its troubled voyage and loss of life, yet the specifics of its final moments remain uncertain. The absence of clarity allowed folklore to grow, filling gaps with rumour, fear, and imagination. The Palatine Light became more than a local ghost story. Tourists and writers travelled to Block Island hoping to glimpse the burning ship. Some returned with second-hand tales, claiming to have seen a faint glow on the horizon that matched the islanders' descriptions. The more people told the story, the stronger its presence became, regardless of whether the light itself appeared. Attempts to debunk the legend through scientific investigation never yielded conclusive answers. Meteorological explanations could account for unusual lights, but not for the consistency of reports tied specifically to the anniversary of the wreck. For believers, the persistence of the sighting suggested that something beyond natural phenomena kept the memory of the Princess Augusta alive. The island's winter storms added to the atmosphere of the tale. Harsh winds, crashing surf, and long nights created the perfect stage for imaginations to conjure fiery visions at sea. Yet, according to many who lived on Block Island, the Palatine Light was not a trick of weather or mind. They maintained that the ghost ship was real, a spectral remnant of tragedy forever bound to the coast. Over centuries, the story of the Palatine Light has shifted from rumour to legend, from legend to cultural identity. Block Island embraces the tale as part of its history, a reminder of the thin line between survival and loss on the Atlantic. The wreck of the Princess Augusta is long past, but the light said to rise from its ashes refuses to fade from memory. The dark horizon in winter invites a chilling hope that a ghostly ship in flames might glide soundlessly across the sea, dissolving into nothing. The Kaz II's Pacific counterpart, the SV Ocean Wave. The vast Pacific stretched endlessly under a cobalt sky as the SV Ocean Wave drifted silently across its waves. Unlike the bustling ports and busy shipping lanes, this part of the ocean seemed almost untouched, and its emptiness amplified the strange events that would follow. Sailors who later passed nearby would describe an odd sense of unease, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. The yacht had set sail from Suva, Fiji, in early March 2009, intending to cross to New Zealand. Its 3 crew members were experienced, all familiar with long voyages in open water. Logs recovered from the vessel recorded calm seas, moderate winds and routine maintenance, giving no hint of the sudden crisis that was about to unfold. By mid-March, the SV Ocean Wave was spotted by a commercial freighter drifting without any crew on board. The ship's sails were partially furled, and the vessel seemed to be following a straight path, yet no one was at the helm. Crew aboard the freighter radioed reports to maritime authorities, describing the eerie stillness and the strange calm surrounding the abandoned yacht. Upon inspection, rescuers found the yacht largely intact. Personal belongings were scattered, but food remained on deck, and life jackets hung neatly along the rail. The 3 crew members were missing, leaving no immediate clues to their fate. There was no evidence of a struggle, damage from rough seas or other vessels nearby. This sudden disappearance mirrored other mysterious incidents in the Pacific, raising questions about what could have happened to experienced sailors in such a controlled environment. Investigators noted that the yacht's autopilot appeared to have been active, guiding the ocean wave along a course that would eventually bring it close to shipping lanes. Yet this did not explain why the crew had vanished. Experts considered scenarios including accidental falls overboard, sudden illness, or even one of the rare and dangerous rogue waves that can appear without warning. Each possibility, however, left gaps that could not be reconciled with the evidence on board. Survivors from nearby vessels reported seeing the yacht moving in ways that suggested it had not been fully under human control. At times, the freighter crew mentioned that the yacht seemed to respond to wind and current almost deliberately, adjusting course as though guided by some unseen hand. This observation fueled maritime speculation, linking the ocean wave's disappearance to similar ghost ship phenomena documented throughout the Pacific over the decades. One striking detail noted by authorities was the condition of the yacht's communications equipment. Radios were functional, and distress signals had not been sent. Logs suggested that radio checks had been routine up until the day of the disappearance. This absence of an SOS message compounded the mystery, as it indicated the crew had either been incapacitated extremely quickly or had left voluntarily under circumstances that remain unclear. Maritime experts also examined the psychological factors at play. Long stretches at sea can induce disorientation, hallucinations or panic, even among skilled sailors. While this could partially explain sudden accidents, there was no evidence that the Ocean Wave's crew was in distress before vanishing. Their disappearance left a chilling question. Could something beyond human comprehension have intervened in the open Pacific? In the years following the incident, various theories circulated. Some proposed that the yacht had been involved in secretive smuggling or espionage, forcing the crew to abandon ship in haste. Others leaned toward the idea of an unfortunate series of accidents, perhaps triggered by equipment failure or a hidden structural flaw. Yet every theory struggled against the simple, haunting facts. The yacht had remained seaworthy, the personal items intact, and the 3 men simply gone. The Ocean Wave's journey into maritime lore grew as other sailors recounted near encounters. Fishing vessels reported seeing a lone yacht drifting aimlessly, its sails shifting in the wind, but no one aboard. Some accounts described fleeting shadows on deck, as if someone had been there moments before. These encounters deepened the mystery, connecting the Ocean Wave to a lineage of ghost ships in the Pacific whose human presence seemed to vanish without a trace. No matter how thorough the searches and investigations, the fate of the crew is still unclear. The Australian Maritime Safety Authority, along with New Zealand authorities, examined ocean currents, weather patterns and potential hazards, but none offered a conclusive answer. Researchers noted that the open Pacific is vast and unpredictable, making the disappearance of even skilled sailors a grim reminder of the sea's power and unpredictability. Marine enthusiasts and ghost ship historians continue to study the Ocean Wave's case, often comparing it to the more famous CAS-2 mystery of 2007. While similarities exist, abandoned yachts drifting with no crew, the Ocean Wave stands apart because of its unique circumstances and the eerie calm that surrounded it when first discovered. Both incidents remind sailors and authorities that the ocean can hold secrets beyond immediate understanding. Interest in the Ocean Wave also sparked debate about safety protocols and preparedness for solo and small crew voyages in open waters. maritime schools and sailing communities analysed the case, emphasising the need for constant vigilance, communication checks, and understanding the psychological toll of extended time at sea. Yet no lessons could fully explain why 3 competent sailors disappeared without a trace. Since then, the SV Ocean Wave has captured the attention of writers, historians, and lovers of maritime mysteries. Photographs of the yacht, taken from a distance by passing vessels, show an ordinary-looking craft moving silently across the water. But the image is deceptive. Its calm exterior conceals one of the Pacific's enduring enigmas, a story of human absence amid the endless expanse of the ocean. Every year, discussions arise when similar reports of abandoned yachts surface, yet the Ocean Wave remains a benchmark for maritime mystery. The case continues to challenge understanding, reminding those who study it that even with advanced technology and navigation, the sea is capable of swallowing lives without warning or explanation. In the minds of sailors, the SV Ocean Wave drifts on, its deserted deck watching the horizon, holding mysteries it will not reveal. The Seo Ghost Yacht. The Seo Ghost Yacht drifted into the waters near the coast of Japan in the summer of 2017, a striking image against the calm sea. Small fishing boats passing by reported the yacht's sails hanging limp, and no one could be seen on deck. The vessel's sudden appearance sparked immediate curiosity, as it was registered and known in local maritime records, but had not been reported lost. Its quiet presence gave an impression of a ship abandoned yet still patrolling the waves with intent. Local authorities first received a call about the yacht on July 12th, when fishermen noticed it moving slowly toward a shipping lane near Kanagawa Prefecture. Coast Guard officers were dispatched to investigate, but as they approached, the yacht's hull showed no signs of damage or distress. The deck was empty, and supplies appeared untouched, suggesting a disappearance that had occurred without warning. Initial reports emphasized the eerie calm surrounding the vessel as if it were sailing under its own quiet command. The yacht had been built in 2003 and had a reputation for safe, private leisure trips along the Japanese coast. Its owner, a retired businessman named Seo Nakamura, was known for his seasonal voyages with family and close friends. Investigators found no recent entries in the ship's log and no signs of a struggle or emergency. The vessel's electronics were operational, but the GPS revealed an unusual drift pattern, inconsistent with normal navigation or wind patterns, adding another layer of mystery to the disappearance. Witnesses described seeing the Seo alone, sometimes anchored near small islands, sometimes moving slowly through open waters. Its presence created a mix of fear and fascination among local sailors, who often reported spotting it at dawn or dusk. Several fishing crews confirmed the sightings independently, noting the yacht's lights were sometimes on without anyone visible, and the sails occasionally fluttered as if responding to an unseen hand. These accounts led to speculations about supernatural involvement or secretive activity. Investigators combed the yacht's interior for clues. Cabins were tidy, personal items were in place, and navigation charts were neatly stored. No personal belongings suggested a sudden evacuation, and food supplies were sufficient for several days. The radio equipment remained powered, yet there were no recent communications. Experts noted that the yacht appeared maintained but unused, as if someone had simply vanished, leaving everything in order. This absence of chaos or emergency intensified the mystery for maritime authorities. Psychologists and maritime experts offered theories ranging from accidental disappearance during a sudden medical emergency to deliberate abandonment for unknown reasons. The calm seas and favourable weather at the time made a tragic accident unlikely. Insurance investigators also examined the vessel's registration, checking for potential financial motives, but nothing suggested fraud or foul play. Every clue seemed to reinforce the notion that the Seo Ghost Yacht was simply floating alone, its human presence evaporated. Some local fishermen shared stories of the yacht appearing near fishing nets without collision, as if it avoided obstacles purposefully. One fisherman, Hiroshi Takeda, recounted, "I saw the yacht drift past my boat slowly. There was no wind, yet it moved as if guided by someone." These eyewitness reports fueled folklore in the region, blending maritime fact with superstition. Tales of the Seo became part of local conversation, a vessel that existed between reality and legend, leaving observers uneasy about what they might see next. In the months following the initial sighting, Coast Guard patrols occasionally found the Seo drifting hundreds of miles from previous locations. Attempts to board or secure the yacht often failed, as it seemed to evade intervention. Authorities remained puzzled by its movements and lack of human occupants. Satellite tracking revealed irregular patterns, with the yacht moving counter to prevailing currents, further perplexing experts studying its trajectory. These anomalies heightened the sense that the yacht was acting independently of human control. The mystery deepened when marine biologists reported observing wildlife interacting unusually with the vessel. Seabirds often perched on the deck as if recognizing it, and schools of fish were seen swimming closely around its hull. Some researchers proposed that the yacht had become a floating ecosystem of sorts, but others suggested it added an unsettling, almost sentient character to the empty vessel. The interactions reinforced the haunting image of the yacht as more than a simple boat abandoned at sea. Despite multiple investigations, the fate of Seo Nakamura and anyone else on board remains unknown. The yacht continues to drift intermittently in the waters of the Western Pacific, occasionally spotted by passing vessels but always without explanation. Its endurance in the open sea and consistent maintenance of operation raise questions that remain unanswered. The Seo Ghost Yacht has become a symbol of the ocean's capacity for both beauty and mystery. Each new sighting revives interest in the phenomenon, drawing journalists, sailors, and curious onlookers to the coastal regions where it appears. Though modern technology allows for tracking and observation, no evidence has surfaced to explain why the yacht remains active yet empty. The case has inspired debates about maritime safety, the limits of human understanding, and the possibility of unseen forces guiding a vessel through open waters. It stands as a contemporary enigma in a long line of ghost ships throughout history. The legend of the Seo Ghost Yacht lingers in maritime circles, a story of a vessel that moves with quiet determination, unclaimed by anyone, yet persistent in presence. Its empty deck and operational systems create a haunting tableau for those who witness it, a reminder of how the ocean can harbour secrets that resist explanation. The Seo Ghost Yacht drifts onward, carrying mysteries that no one has yet been able to solve. The lunatic of the Adriatic. The Adriatic Sea has long been a place of clear waters, rocky islands, and quiet coves. Yet in the late 20th century, sailors began speaking of a solitary vessel that seemed to drift without purpose or guidance. Locals came to call it the lunatic of the Adriatic because of the strange patterns in which it moved. Fishermen and ferry crews described seeing the small sailboat weaving between islands, often in calm weather, as if responding to invisible currents or an unseen pilot. The vessel first drew attention in 1987 when it was spotted near the coast of Croatia, between Split and Dubrovnik. Witnesses reported that the boat was fully rigged but empty. Its sails were taut even when there was no wind, and it sometimes changed direction sharply without explanation. Coast Guard patrols investigated, but the crew could never find anyone aboard. The boat appeared seaworthy, well-maintained, yet entirely deserted, raising questions about its origin and owner. Over the following years, sightings became more frequent. Sailors travelling between the islands of Hvar and Korčula would report the boat appearing in the distance, always moving silently, sometimes disappearing behind a rocky outcrop only to reappear hours later. Locals began leaving notes and warnings for passing crews, cautioning them to stay clear of the vessel. Some suggested the boat was cursed, while others proposed it was guided by an eccentric or mentally disturbed sailor who had vanished mysteriously. Investigators tried to trace ownership through maritime records, but there were no recent registrations matching the vessel. Older records showed that a small yacht, similar in build and design, had been sold in the 1970s to a private owner in Rijeka, but contact had been lost decades prior. This disappearance of official records only heightened the mystery. Authorities speculated that it might have been abandoned intentionally or stolen, yet no definitive explanation emerged. One particularly striking sighting occurred in 1992 when a tourist ferry reported seeing the boat at dawn near the island of Brac. Passengers described the vessel moving in a tight circle as if inspecting the surrounding waters. Its movements were deliberate but unexplained, almost purposeful, yet no human presence was ever detected. The ferry's crew radioed the Coast Guard, but by the time authorities arrived, the boat had vanished, leaving only a gentle wake in the morning calm. Local historians noted that archival shipping logs from nearby ports occasionally mentioned a small, unidentified sailboat appearing without registration or crew. In 1995, a record from the Port of Split detailed a vessel matching the description of the lunatic of the Adriatic drifting near customs checkpoints, yet Coast Guard reports confirmed no docking or contact. These entries suggest that the boat's presence was persistent and documented, lending weight to claims that it was not merely a figment of sailors' imaginations. Maritime experts examined photographs and reports of the boat. They noted that its rigging and hull were unusually well maintained for a vessel with no apparent caretaker. Some suggested that currents and wind could explain portions of its movement, but the precision with which the boat appeared to navigate narrow channels and avoid rocks defied conventional explanation. Each sighting added to the growing legend of the Adriatic's wandering ghost. Fishermen shared personal accounts of encounters that bordered on the surreal. One skipper, Miro Jovanovic, recounted seeing the boat drift close to his own without a sound. "It moved as if it knew where to go," he said. "I could see through the cabin windows and there was no one. It was just alive in a strange way." These reports made the vessel a topic of folklore, a maritime puzzle that sparked both fear and fascination along the Dalmatian coast. In addition to its erratic movements, the boat was known for appearing in places where it seemed impossible to reach without human intervention. It would emerge in hidden bays, around small islands, or near narrow straits where the wind and current alone could not account for its trajectory. Some sailors claimed that it had almost intercepted their own courses, drifting silently past them as if observing human activity. The repeated sightings and consistent empty state reinforced the perception that the boat was more than just abandoned. It was enigmatic. By the late 1990s, the legend had spread beyond local communities. International sailors travelling in the Adriatic reported glimpses of the vessel, often under foggy or low visibility conditions. Its consistent reappearance and precise navigation created widespread intrigue. Researchers considered it a valuable case study in maritime anomalies, combining elements of unexplained movement, possible supernatural interpretation, and the psychology of folklore within seafaring communities. Despite extensive monitoring, no one has ever boarded or taken possession of the vessel. Attempts to intercept it with modern equipment failed, as the boat seemed to anticipate approaches and drift out of reach. Photographs and eyewitness reports remain the primary evidence of its existence. For decades, sailors have debated whether it is guided by some hidden human influence or something entirely beyond comprehension. Its continued presence in the Adriatic Sea has made it a persistent enigma for both authorities and enthusiasts. The legend of the lunatic of the Adriatic persists because the vessel challenges expectations of control and presence at sea. It is seaworthy, yet unmanned. It is deliberate, yet unexplained. Those who have encountered it speak of an unsettling intelligence behind its motions, a sense that the boat exists with awareness of its surroundings. The story endures not just as a maritime curiosity, but as a cautionary tale of the sea's capacity to harbour mysteries that resist rational explanation. Even decades after the first sightings, the small sailboat drifts through the Adriatic, leaving observers uncertain whether they are witnessing a wandering craft or a ghostly presence with a mind of its own. The Lady Loveibond. The sands of Goodwin Sands have long been known to sailors as a treacherous stretch of the English Channel where shifting shoals and hidden currents claimed countless ships. Among the stories whispered across centuries is the tale of the Lady Loveibond, a schooner said to haunt the waters near Deal, Kent. Locals describe a ghostly vessel appearing on stormy nights, its white sails glowing faintly against the dark horizon, as though warning mariners away from the same fate that befell her. Built in 1748, the Lady Loveibond was a small yet elegantly constructed schooner, intended for private leisure rather than cargo. Her story begins with Captain Simon Reed, a man who had recently lost his young bride, whose name is often given as Annabella. According to legend, Reed's grief drove him to sail the Lady Loveibond on a fateful Valentine's Day, in defiance of both reason and superstition. The ship departed Deal under clear skies, but ominous winds began to stir as the day wore on, foreshadowing the disaster that was to come. Eyewitness accounts claim that the Lady Loveibond was seen sailing smoothly on the morning of February 13th, 1748. The ship reportedly carried a small party of friends and crew, celebrating what should have been a joyous occasion. However, the captain's obsession with his lost love is said to have sparked jealousy and tension among those on board. As the vessel neared the treacherous sands, the story goes that Reed's emotions overcame him, leading to an act that would seal the ship's fate forever. According to the legend, Reed deliberately steered the Lady Loveibond onto the sands, ensuring that the ship would be wrecked. Some historians argue this may have been a romanticised embellishment, but accounts written in local parish records from the mid-18th century reference a tragic loss on Goodwin Sands on that very date. The ship broke apart almost immediately, and all aboard perished, leaving the schooner to vanish beneath the waves. Over time, the tale became a cautionary story for sailors, warning against the perils of obsession and the unpredictability of the sea. Through countless retellings, maritime folklore has kept the story of the Lady Loveibond alive. Sightings of the ghost ship reportedly began shortly after the original wreck. Fishermen and coastal watchmen claimed that the schooner would appear once every 50 years, sailing silently along the sands, perfectly intact but without crew. The earliest recorded sighting after the wreck occurred in 1798, precisely 50 years later, reinforcing the eerie pattern that has been noted in eyewitness accounts for generations. In 1848, another sighting was reported by a lighthouse keeper stationed near the Kent coast. He described seeing a schooner with luminous sails gliding over the waves on a foggy February evening. Despite using a telescope, he could detect no figures on deck, only the ship itself moving as if driven by invisible hands. Similar reports surfaced in 1898 and again in 1948, always around Valentine's Day, strengthening the legend of the Lady Loveibond as a ghostly harbinger of doomed love. A similar observation in 1898 was made by a group of fishermen who reported hearing faint music and voices coming from the direction of the schooner, though no one was aboard. Skeptics have attempted to explain the sightings as mirages, reflections, or optical illusions caused by fog and light. Yet many witnesses insist on the unmistakable silhouette of a single-masted schooner with clean white sails, identical to historical descriptions of the Lady Loveibond. The consistency of these accounts across centuries and the recurrence of the 50-year interval leave even some rational observers unsettled. For those living along the coast, the story has become a deeply ingrained part of local identity, shared as both warning and fascination. Researchers have noted that the ship's repeated appearances coincide with particularly strong tidal currents, suggesting that the ghostly sightings may follow natural patterns influenced by the shifting sands. Local archives hold fragmented records of the Lady Loveibond's final voyage, noting the disappearance of all hands but providing little detail beyond the date and location of the wreck. These sparse documents have been scrutinised by maritime historians, attempting to separate fact from legend. While no physical remnants of the ship have ever been conclusively identified, maps of Goodwin's Sands from the 18th century confirm the hazard that claimed so many vessels. The combination of historical records and repeated sightings has made the Lady Loveibond one of the most enduring ghost ship stories in England. Beyond the coast of Kent, the Lady Loveibond has inspired art, literature and maritime folklore studies. Poets of the 19th century wrote verses about the schooner's doomed love story, emphasising Reed's obsession and the tragedy of the crew. Illustrations from the era often depict the vessel gliding eerily over the sands, capturing the imagination of both sailors and civilians. Contemporary historians treat the story with cautious interest, recognising the blend of documented loss and folkloric embellishment that keeps the legend alive. Some modern sailors report feeling an unshakable sense of presence when navigating near Goodwin Sands on cold February nights. Instruments may register strange anomalies, and sudden fogs appear without warning, leading to the belief that the Lady Loveibond still haunts her original route. These accounts are anecdotal, yet they contribute to the sense of mystery surrounding the ship. Maritime enthusiasts often plan voyages around the sands to glimpse the schooner, although such sightings remain rare and unpredictable. In 1998, a Coast Guard patrol recorded unusual radar echoes near Goodwin Sands that could not be matched with any known vessel, adding a technological element to the centuries-old legend. The Lady Loveibond's story serves as a testament to the power of the sea and the human imagination. Her repeated appearances, tied so precisely to the date of her wreck, create an enduring pattern that continues to intrigue and unsettle. Each sighting renews the connection between history and legend, making the ghost ship a symbol of lost love, obsession, and the untamed nature of the English Channel. The schooner remains an enigmatic figure on the horizon, her sails glowing faintly in the fog as if carrying the memories of those who perished on that fateful Valentine's Day. The ghost ship of the Northumberland Strait. The waters of the Northumberland Strait have long carried an unusual reputation. Locals often speak of a mysterious ship that appears without warning, its white sails glowing faintly in the mist. Unlike ordinary vessels, it drifts silently along the strait, sometimes visible from the shore, and at other times vanishing entirely. Fishermen and travellers first reported glimpses of the ghostly vessel in the early 1800s, and the tales have persisted through generations, growing more vivid with each retelling. Descriptions of the ship are consistent despite the decades separating sightings. Witnesses often describe a fully rigged schooner with sails that ripple as if caught in a non-existent wind. Some say it appears calm and inviting, while others claim it seems ominous, its presence accompanied by an unexplained chill. The waters themselves seem to react, as fog often thickens around the vessel, hiding it from view until it has passed or disappeared entirely. One of the earliest recorded sightings occurred in 1820, when a ferry captain from Prince Edward Island reported seeing a glowing ship moving slowly against the current. He described hearing faint sounds of crew activity, though the deck appeared empty when he approached. His report was dismissed by authorities at the time, yet word of the encounter spread quickly among local communities. Farmers and fishermen began noting similar appearances, and the story became a regular topic at local gatherings. By the late 19th century, the ghost ship had earned a name, the Flying Dutchman of the Northumberland Strait. Many assumed the legend was imported from European folklore, but the repeated appearances along the strait gave the phenomenon a distinctly local identity. Residents reported that the ship would appear most often during calm, foggy nights, reflecting the moonlight in a way that made it seem both near and impossibly distant. Children and adults alike claimed to have seen it from the shore, its sails shimmering like a phantom in the water. Reports from the early 20th century added unsettling details. Some witnesses described hearing the creak of timbers and muffled voices coming from the ship, even though no crew was visible. Others noted that the vessel sometimes changed direction without apparent cause, gliding slowly into areas where treacherous shoals lay hidden. Many locals began to fear that the ghost ship was not simply a curiosity, but a warning, appearing in areas to prevent accidents or to signal dangers hidden beneath the waves. Scientific attempts to explain the sightings have offered several theories. Some experts suggest that optical illusions caused by the unique combination of fog, moonlight and water currents may create the appearance of a ghost ship. Mirage effects can make distant vessels look larger or closer than they are, and under certain conditions, a small fishing boat could appear as a large schooner. Yet even skeptics admit that not all sightings align with these explanations, especially those that include detailed accounts of sails, masts, and even movement against the current. In the 1950s, modern observers added further accounts. Ferrymen and commercial fishers noted that the ship would sometimes appear on the horizon at the same location repeatedly over consecutive nights. They described the vessel as eerily consistent in appearance, a detail that fueled theories that it was more than a simple optical illusion. Some accounts even reported that the ship seemed to vanish abruptly when approached, leaving only a calm surface in its wake. The mysterious reputation of the legend was fueled by local folklore. Stories circulated of sailors and travellers who attempted to board the vessel, only to find themselves suddenly back on shore or thrown into a state of disorientation. Elders in small towns around the strait insisted that the ship was a protector, appearing to guide lost mariners away from hidden rocks or strong currents. Others believed it carried a tragic past, a ship doomed to wander the waters forever due to a forgotten misfortune long ago. Into the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the ship was still being sighted, occasionally recorded on film or in photographs. Amateur historians collected these images, comparing the ship's size, shape and position across decades. In one 1986 report, a group of tourists captured the vessel drifting silently across the water under a full moon, its sails luminous in a manner that defied natural explanation. Observers noted no crew, no sound of engines, and a lack of any wake behind the hull, reinforcing the impression of a supernatural presence. The origins of the ghost ship remain unclear, despite exhaustive investigation. Some theories link it to a real schooner that disappeared in the 18th century, suggesting that the vessel may carry a lingering imprint of its crew's fate. Others claim the ship is a manifestation of maritime memory, appearing as a spectral echo whenever conditions align. Whatever the cause, the stories continue to inspire awe, fear, and fascination among those living near the strait and visitors drawn by its reputation. Encounters with the ship continue among mariners, who often feel either calm or a disquieting tension when it appears. Those who have seen it consistently note a pattern. It emerges during foggy nights, moves silently against the current, and disappears as suddenly as it arrives. The ghost ship has become a symbol of the strait itself, a mysterious presence that reminds observers of the dangers and beauty of these waters. The ghost ship of the Northumberland Strait remains one of the most enduring maritime legends of Canada, a phenomenon that has defied both explanation and time, silently drifting where few dare to follow.